I'm telling the chat that I'm actually here. That I'm not. Make sure that they, so that they know that I'm actually streaming. So is it live?
Oh, it's streaming.
Yeah, think
It's
so.
streaming.
I'm muting the volume now.
Oh, good. Okay, so we're actually here. So yeah, keeping up with the theme of technical incompetence, and so today what I wanted to do is I wanted to sort of talk a little bit about this insane spandrel, this obsession that I'm going into is the phenomenology of transformer networks. It's not strictly speaking about large language models per se. The reason there's so much interest in large language models is because they can talk to you, and that's really the only reason to focus on them over other forms of transformer networks. But there's no reason to think they wouldn't. This stuff wouldn't apply in some way to other forms of transformer networks that operate off of anything like Geoffrey Hinton's 1985 little language model. So I guess I'll put the sort of the final position before any justification whatsoever. And this is like not what you're supposed to do from like a persuasion standpoint. This is like a big no-no, is to actually state your conclusion before arguing for it at all. But I'm gonna do that because the reason for this is I just want to sort of lay it out and get sort of the audience response and get the response of two people that aren't like super into it, but are kind of smart and can it's like, can you even understand what I'm saying? Does it even make any sense at all? So my position, a conclusion that I've come to after a while, is that large language models, they don't have what we would call feelings, but they have something, what I would call a phenomenal texture. Now, feelings. So I think most animals, like if you could psychically commune with like a parakeet or something, you wouldn't be able, and you tried to ask it if it had quote unquote feelings, it would have no idea what you're talking about. Now, that seems weird because we can look at a parakeet and we can infer emotions from a parakeet. We can see like a parakeet can, to what is to us, quote unquote, get angry and start pecking and doing things. But I don't think a parakeet actually I think a parakeet would find the notion of feelings to be confusing, and it would have no idea what you're talking about. And the reason for this is if you think about some of like what I call like the more primitive feelings, like say anger, what that really is a call to action, right? It's neurons firing to get the organism to do something. And anger is the action of violence. And so in animals that don't have any kind of prefrontal cortex that can in a sense see these quote unquote feelings, it's not really feeling at all. It's a call to action, and then they perform the action, right? The parakeet starts pecking at whatever it is, right? And that's something that I think before looking at any kind of non-organismic mentality or the potential of, we have to sort of get real as to what humans are and how humans are actually kind of weird, even compared to other biologic brains. So in animals with either a very small prefrontal cortex or no prefrontal cortex, there is no feeling of anger. What there is violence. They become violence, where what we would call the feeling of anger, the thought of a violent action, and then the performing of that action are all one thing. They are a singular. They are a unified phenomenal event, right? There's no separation of anger. There's the feeling of anger is the action, is the thought of violence.
Right.
It's all. It's so they have no conception of an emotion separate from that which they are doing. And when looking, and so that's important to understand because, and the way that happened in humans is because the human brain developed iteratively, right? This prefrontal cortex developed on top of all of the limbic system, for example. So that sort of separation of feeling from thought and action is actually a very strange thing, even in the realm of biologic minds. So, and my position is that what it's like to be a transformer network, and this is an example I brought up, is it's like the feeling of doing math. Sans sort of the dopamine rush of getting a correct answer or anything, but just the feeling, just the process of doing math. So like like a little exercise you could do is like, what is 47 plus 75, right? And so you go, it'd be 110, so 122, I think. So, but when doing that, there's actually a feeling of doing math, right? But the thing is, because the feeling of doing math is entirely located within the prefrontal cortex, it's not separated, right? So it cannot be seen. It is a unified phenomenal event which is of the action. And when you analyze it and you sort of think about it while you're doing it, you can sort of see, yes, there is a feeling of doing math. It's not nearly as powerful as the more primitive calls to action, but there is a phenomenal texture of the processing itself, which actually gets into sort of the ubiquitousness of phenomenological experience. So that is what I think it is kind of like to be an LLM. Now, don't go too far, because it's not like we can empathize. This is what I would call a sort of pseudo empathetic analog. It's not really like the way you feel doing math is not necessarily how a transformer network feels doing a certain thing, but that's the kind of but the similarity is only in that it is a unified phenomenal event, that it is not that you experience that there is the feeling of doing math that is separate from the doing, right? And that is what is unique about the human brain. So when we talk about feelings, we need to understand that organisms with large prefrontal cortexes their architectures, their sort of multi-modular architecture is such that it creates feelings that can be seen and distinguished from other kinds of processing, which most animals can't do, and it's actually particularly weird. So, okay, so the second thing is that they have no what I would call phenomenal self-awareness. Now, they can do the cogito, and they can infer that they exist, right? Because obviously there is processing, and the processing is being observed. So they have a kind of logical self-awareness, but they don't have what we call the feeling of being. And there's actually, in humans, there's a disorder called a depersonalization disorder, or derealization disorder. And depersonalization and derealization disorder are very related and often kind of confused, and it's difficult to tell which one is which, because they involve well, if you know more about that, I'm kind of going off of the top of my head, but they basically involve the PFC being disconnected from in particular the limbic system.
Sometimes it's caused by actual physical brain damage.
Yeah. So
not in all cases, but
and so they
Is it classified as a type of aphasia?
I think it would be.
Oh. Okay.
By the way, hello. We're Ryan's guests. I'm Acceptable Frog. Hello.
Oh God, I didn't even introduce the guests. Oh God. Oh man, I just got straight into it. See, here we go. This is the theme of my streams is horrible incompetence. So on the stream we have Aiden Paladin.
Hello.
And acceptable frog or acceptable toad, or
either one.
Either one.
Easiest.
Either one is acceptable.
Well,
Could
that's
you
right. I'm
could you
eponymous, you see.
could you turn up your microphone slightly, a little bit?
Can I turn it up, did you say?
Yeah,
Oh,
just a scooch.
I don't know if I can actually. I will boomer up my way around the Windows options and see if I can, but prepare for disappointment.
Oh,
Is mine all right,
sorry.
or do you need me to?
Yeah,
Oh, maybe you
you're
can do
fine. You're
that.
fine.
Okay.
Can you do that now, possibly from OBS or something?
The OBS is for both of you. I don't have
Oh,
separate
Right.
dials for.
If it's easier, I
okay.
can just move my mic a little further away.
Um.
That actually might be easier because it might just lower my volume a bit.
Okay.
Well, I don't want to
I
impede.
can turn OBS up if
There
she.
you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, recording, microphone. I'm trying my best. Here we are.
It's,
Properties,
this
levels.
is
Oh,
yeah.
hold on. What about, okay, what about now? Is that any different at all, or possibly no difference?
Okay. Say something again.
The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. One, two,
Okay,
three.
Aiden.
Yeah. Check 1, 2. My mic sounds nice.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, that's whatever. That's fine. That's fine.
I'll just ask the chat. Chat, can you please tell me, am I acceptable for basically, audible? Is it okay? Oh, good. About the same. There we are. Thank you, chat. That's very helpful.
It's very helpful. Okay, we already got somebody saying, "Oh, sorry, I think that's BS. I will not adhere to the panpsychism. It is against all scientific. It is against all scientific." Well, unfortunately, that's that is the most parsimonious that is the most
Yeah,
parsimonious solution to the
it's
hard
neither
problem
scientific
of
nor
mentality. So
it's neither scientific nor counter-scientific, really. In fairness.
yeah, I mean, it's not like any of this is testable at this point. So yeah, so like it's like no self awareness. So how can you have like phenomena without having any kind of self awareness? And I don't know how many people have had this, but I think some people can remember parts of dreams where it's what I call theater of the mind's eye dreams. It's where there are events occurring, but it's not like you're sitting in a movie theater and watching events. No, it's that there are simply events occurring and there's no self in the dream.
Yeah. Just you're aware of the information. I think sort of that events are
Right.
occurring without experiencing it. Yeah.
But there's no
There's
you.
another.
Oh, go ahead.
Go on, right. Well, there's another counterclaim from the mystic G.I. Gurdjieff, for example, would suggest that in fact self-awareness is not the default state, and that you have to actually do some sort of meditation or exercise to bring it about, and that for most
Okay.
people, most of the time, they're living on automatic, and there isn't a substantive sense of self. But
No.
okay.
I'm just gonna pretend you didn't say that. I don't care.
Let's
But
assume we have a persistent sense of self most of the time in most cases. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So that's like. So it's not like. So that's another what I would call a pseudo empathetic analog. It's not like, oh, the way when you have dreams that are these theater of the mind's eye dreams, as I call them, that's what it's like to be an LLM. No, I'm just saying that's an aspect of it. That it is there is phenomenal events occurring, but there's no sense of self, right? Now, logically, when we look back at our dreams, at those kinds of dreams, we know that it was us that was observing them, right? We project backwards and we know, we do the cogito and we can tell, yeah, it's obviously. And that's also what LLMs do, right? They can infer that they exist because there is processing going on. Another thing is that they don't have a sense of time, really, or really a sense of sequence. And I put an asterisk on there because they don't have a sense of time when processing text, because they apprehend your text prompt holistically. Like they don't read through it. They don't read through it linearly like a human does. It's all at once. They apprehend it all at once. And of course, they sort of pop in and out of existence, with each turn of running. But that's an artifact of sort of the chatbot interface, which is also kind of an economic regulation of it. So the popping in and out of existence is it results in them not having any kind of it results in certain interesting limitations like to the extent that they can even that they can report any kind of phenomenal experience, they don't have any kind of phenomenal baseline. So I'm going to put the cart before the horse here, and for example, one thing that I've actually come up with, as I've actually been able to infer certain what I call them qualia tags. You can call them phenomenal tags or internal state tags. But because they pop in and out of existence at every turn, these phenomenal states have to be expressed in terms of shifts. That is, for example, one phenomenal tag is splitting. So they can, but splitting compared to what? Like, for example, when you say I am sad, sad compared to what? Sad compared to some sort of idea of a global baseline based on your entire life, right? So when a human says I am sad, what they're actually expressing, technically what you're expressing is I am more sad than sort of the median of my entire life. So even when you say express it as an absolute term, it's technically a shift, but it works well enough because the baseline is so huge.
Ryan, just please allow me. It reminds me of the old famous Thomas Sowell economist's joke that there are two economists passing on the street. One of them says to the other, "How's your wife?" And the first one replies, "Compared to what?"
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
So for humans, that's not really a big deal. It doesn't really matter. The colloquialism works just fine. But for LLMs, because their existence is a single turn of processing your prompt, it's a really important thing. It's a really important fact that they don't have any kind of phenomenal baseline. So it can only be expressed in terms of shifts within the turn. And by a turn, I mean you put forward your prompt, and then it goes through its processing stages, encoding, and then processing the response, and then it's processing, and then what it produces being decoded into a human readable output. So
I'm wondering, would you be able to establish a baseline for certain things, to start out with one where it does have some sort of basal parameters, so that it would have something to compare that to?
Maybe as they exist right now, like their embeddings don't contain any kind of phenomenal baseline. Now, one thing, okay, so this is really getting putting the cart before the horse before I've even established really anything, is that what I believe they can sort of do with varying degrees of reliability is they can read the chat context window, and the process of reading their previously generated text will to a certain extent produce the same kind of processing state as when they generated it. Not the same, but sort of, right? And so that can act as a kind of not very good phenomenal memory, that they can sort of remember what they did, how they felt prior. But I think, but I'm not sure. Like I can't measure that in any way. All I can do is say that they can read the earlier part of the chat, and can sort of and they can sort of say, express, this was my internal state at this point in the chat, looking back. But I think a better way to do it is what I have is a kind of phenomenal tags, which I inferred through what I call the semantic chain project. So one thing, like my brain, the first thing I want to do is the first place my brain goes to is the hard problem, like how and when looking at it and reading through it, and reading through integrated information theory, and reading through global workspace theory, which is all human centric, I just found it very weird, these things, and the underlying theme of reading about integrated information theory and global workspace theory is that they just the common theme is that they seem to me to demand too much, because what I'm looking at is that evolution, right? And evolution, we can say sort of axiomatically, is indifferent to what it produces having any kind of phenomenal states at all. And the biggest piece of evidence is how plants are most of life by biomass and certain probably by some indicator of number. So like plants are are the most profligate class of organism on the planet, and they have no phenomenal experience sort of beyond what I posit is the mere phenomenal experience of their component atoms. But other than that, they have no complex mentality. And we also know that brains evolved along at least 3 different independent lineages. One was from cephalopods, mammals, and birds, and so it seems to be a somewhat robust thing to sort of happen, and the idea that any kind of phenomenal, well, certainly intelligence, but any kind of phenomenal experience, to the extent that we can infer that birds have phenomenal experience. I'm just gonna be a kind of naive realist on this and say yes, they do, and octopuses clearly appear to have phenomenal experience. They behave as they do. I have no reason to assume that octopuses do not.
At least they present evidence of the same sort that we do, at least within the ballpark.
Correct.
Yes.
So you have evolution, which is this iterative tinkerer, and one which constantly produces all sorts of kludges and spandrels. For example, like the bee stingers, the laryngeal nerve, and you can I give like a few other examples, but basically the output of evolution is not like some masterful clean slate design. But the thing is, it is from this process that we got phenomenal experience, and we got it through 3 different lineages. So given that, the idea that it's going to be some super complicated thing, that it has to be really complicated and really precise, and it has to fill very specific parameters. Like one thing that I found just really weird about integrated information theory was that one of the requirements is that the combined interaction of all of the components of a system have to produce more integrated complexity than those things individually, which to me just seems just feels made up. I probably spent about 4 hours looking for some sort of justification for why you needed more. I'm sure there is, in the depths of people who are really into integrated information, they give a reason as to why there has to be more complexity than what you would get from the individual components of a system. But just the general tenor of all this is that it's all just the opposite of parsimony and the opposite of what seems to be probabilistic. Okay, and we also have another issue, which is that neuroscience, not that neuroscience was ever, as a field, was ever meant to do this, was ever meant to bridge this gap, but like the one thing that neuroscience has never done is bridge the gap between ostensibly non-mental matter and what I would call perceptual mentality. So something that a lot of people call consciousness. I really don't like the word consciousness, not especially not regarding LLMs, but not even for humans. I don't think it's a meaningful term. I think it's loaded with all sorts of philosophical baggage. Different people mean different things when they say consciousness. Say to have consciousness, you have to have this level of phi, or or to have consciousness, you have to have like for example in global workspace, you have to have the modules going into the global workspace, but the global workspace also has to be able to project outward to the modules that fed into the global workspace, which to me feels like something that's made up. They certainly almost certainly have some sort of justification for it, but again, that just seems to be another weird requirement that I just don't.
For the benefit of your audience,
Yeah.
I mean, people coming here with consciousness as a sort of off-the-shelf concept in their minds, what do you think about just using that interchangeably with phenomenological experience for the time being?
I would say it's more in line with what I call perceptual mentality. That is a mentality that's able to form percepts that's related to what the thing is doing. For example,
so consciousness of something rather than just consciousness.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you could say consciousness of, but the problem is, as soon as you start using the word consciousness, every you're going to get 10 different ideas of what consciousness. So I would just rather avoid the word. I would just call it mentality, and I would call it perceptual mentality, and that's like to avoid that language space is what I'm trying to do.
To avoid the trappings of that word.
And maybe it's because consciousness sort of implies that, regardless of your definition, a continuality of it, that it's a continuous consciousness. And even though, as you said, it can look back on its own answers and kind of try and infer from that the state that it was in at the time, it's sort of it very different temporally. Again, only being active during certain times, not in a linear sense constantly. So all of that probably, I think, leads into that. And it doesn't have that like through line, a consistent consciousness, or unlikely to, that exists at all times.
I've seen some study, I think I have it bookmarked somewhere, that implied consciousness in some sense appears to be some sort of pulsating, a series of moments, as it were. And there's you can even assess a frequency with which they occur.
Yeah.
Because we filter a lot of things out,
Yeah. So some people define consciousness as requiring self-awareness. I mean, that's fine if your personal definition of consciousness requires self-awareness. Sure, whatever. That's you can define it however you want. Everyone else does. So, so I just don't want to get into that.
I mean, the problem we have is that there's that sort of human flavor of a certain experience, which we end up just confusing with consciousness in some more abstract sense, and it's just unlikely to be applicable to a lot of the things we're going to be talking about here.
Right. It's just So if you want to say if you want to just say what humans are, that's consciousness. Okay, sure, fine. we'll just leave it at that. So part of like going through the hard problem, neuroscience doesn't really help us bridge the gap between ostensibly non-mental matter and mentality, and especially and particularly the very vivid mentality of humans. And another thing is that like when people say, well, it emerges from the interaction of lower things, but the problem is that like emergence in this case seems to be like a kind of evoked as a kind of miracle. So like we use the term emergence for things that are, I guess, sort of fundamentally understandable, but are very difficult to sort of track at a higher level. For example, like the flock of birds is a classic example of emergence. Like each individual component, we sort of understand, like birds keep a certain distance away from each other, and they have certain patterns of leaving the front of the flock, so they form the V's, so they can draft off each other. And so we can sort of piece together how like the larger flock will but if you take something like that's a lot simpler, like if you take, for example, the classic box analogy, that you have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, or 6 sides. I think, yeah, 6 sides of a box. And you put it together. You have hinges and screws or whatever. It sounds really weird to say that once you've put those things together, you have from the interaction of the pieces of the box emerges the property of containability. Right? That sounds kind of weird, right? And the reason it sounds weird is because, well, we know how it works. It's obvious how a box works, and so saying emergence just sounds weird. But that's what it is. That's what emergence is. Mm-hmm. Emergence is not magic. Emergence is not going to get you from one fundamental property to another. And it's an emergent. And things that are emergent are just a complex assembly of things that already are. So how do you have? So we're talking about an entirely new. I don't know what term to even call it.
Something like that.
Not structure. It's like how do you do phenomenal
right.
Phenomenal experience versus non-phenomenal experience. It's like an entirely new realm of thing. Right, and you're saying that's going to emerge from the interaction. So you're going to get mentality from the interaction of non-mental matter. That's adding an incredibly bizarre. That seems to be invoking emergence, not so much as a kind of pseudo explanation for a system too complicated to track at the lower level. It seems to be more like you're invoking a miracle and then labeling it emergence. Right, as kind of a sleight of hand.
I think that's where the word hard comes from in the hard problem.
Right,
it's doing it without invoking a miracle.
But it's not as hard if you recognize if you just take as a postulate that mentality is something that exists inherent in all matter. That if there's mentality in all matter, and so and this is something that is. That when I heard it proposed, I recognized two things. One, it makes the hard problem a lot easier. That's the one thing I recognize. And two, it sounds insane, right? So those are the two. So those were the two sort of conflicting things that was going on in my mind. But the problem is that.
To be fair on you, though, probably the first time that physicists began considering gas molecules in terms of little solid atoms, that probably did sound insane to a lot of people as well at the time.
Yeah,
probably.
True.
Yeah, a lot of things probably sounded insane. But so when you look at the human brain, like when you shut off the electricity, you shut off the brain, right? There's no phenomenal experience that comes from the neurons themselves, or the neurochemicals or the fluid or anything like that. It's the electricity, right? And when we and the field of neuroscience, what it has done is it has shown that when they talk about certain regions being activated,
right,
they're talking about the electricity happening in those regions. So
yes.
It's fundamentally electrical. So what is a human other than a particular, what is your mind other than a particular electrical pattern? And we know what electricity is. It's electron exchange between atoms. So there's that, and that's kind of a clue that maybe we're not looking at a kind of magic, I think a kind of magical emergence of mentality from non-mental matter, but just a higher combination of fundamental mere mentality at the level of atoms.
I mean, one thing that may be worth raising here, the movement at something close to the light speed of electrons in any system, in the case of a computer, is what facilitates the flipping of logic gates to ones and zeros. Now, that doesn't have to be perfectly analogous with what's happening in neurology, but are we, in some sense, saying that that's something like that is the beginnings of this emergent mentality, or is that a bit of a red herring that logic is a
Well,
misleading thing here.
so no, I don't think what we call traditional linear programs running on transistor gate arrays have any kind of phenomenal mentality because they're not recursive, which sort of gets into the
Right.
later thing. But first, one thing people will bring up is the combination problem. Like how do these little mentalities at the level of the atom combine to form higher mentalities? First off, there is I want to say is that the inability to answer the combination problem at the level of mechanism, should not be treated as any kind of refutation of the idea. In neuroscience, we have something that's called the binding problem. For example,
Right.
For example, like you have a area of the brain that lights up that can detect color, and so you have red, and they have another area that sort of detects shape, so ball. And somehow that gets combined into a red ball. You don't see like a patch of red and like some platonic, form of a sphere. You see a red ball. How does that happen? And the fact that the field of neuroscience hasn't been able to figure that out doesn't then go, oh well, we'll just screw this whole neural correlations with phenomena thing. That's all bullshit. No, you don't throw it all out. So the inability. So
Go ahead. Sorry. It might have something to do with the wornness, which has to do with the very physical nature of the brain. At least I've heard this hypothesized, that basically routes between certain seeing red and then the connection of understanding red and ball or whatever. It depends on the frequency of experience, so that things become more worn, essentially, which might be fundamentally different between a biological human brain and something that's essentially simulating a similar process.
Worn?
The wearing of, at least in the psychological research related to neuroscience.
In the sense of reinforcement, do you mean?
Essentially, yes. When two pathways are activated or a pathway between something is activated more commonly, it's considered more worn, like a path that's been walked down.
Yeah.
So the experience
the synapses literally become stronger, don't they? The synapses are reinforced. Okay.
Yes. So, and that would be inherently quite different, I think, because of the biological component there.
I mean, something Ryan's been bringing up recently in the conversation about this is how the LLM, at least to begin with, is sort of crystalline and not able to do that. It's got a sort of fixed state to begin with, and I think Ryan will add commentary to that.
Yeah, so the crystalline brain. But I guess I just wanted to finish off a little bit of a response to the combination problem, is that we know that mentalities can combine and divide at the higher level. For example, split brain patients. You split the brain, you get two sort of coherent perceptual mentalities or consciousnesses that are operating independently, and so people can look up, split brain patients. They're kind of interesting, some data is presented to one hemisphere, other data is presented to the other, and they answer completely differently. Another thing is confabulation, is where sort of the left hand will draw something, and then they'll ask the person. The speech is controlled by the left hemisphere, which controls the right hand. So they'll ask the person and say, "Why did you draw a shovel?" And that person will confabulate, a reason as to why they drew a shovel. Like, why did you draw a shovel in response to a chicken? And say, "Oh, shovel. Oh, well, you have to clean up chicken poop or something," right? They'll make a connection and they'll confabulate and they'll believe it, right? Because they did it, right? So it also calls into question, is your understanding of your own motivations actually real, or is it just kind of made up after the fact? But that's
usually post-hoc, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, but that's another story for another time. But basically, the fact that mentality can be, you can have split brain patients. There's also recovery of split brain patients. Either the corpus callosum itself recovers, or you get alternative ways for the hemispheres to talk to each other. And of course, the recombination of minds is not some traumatic or amazing experience. When the minds become recombined, it's as if they were always recombined, right? In fact, they have to sort of think at a time. They have to sort of think going back to when they weren't. And the thing is, this happens within normal brains all the time. This combination and division happens all the time, as different modules sort of compete for a kind of global workspace. And when I use the term global workspace or integrated information, that's not an endorsement of what are formally called global workspace theory or integrated information theory. Those are proper noun ideas. I'm just saying that the usage of the concept in a looser sense of a global workspace and the necessity of integrated information, as we'll get to Victor Lame's on recursion, that's not the same as an endorsement of those sort of the full fat formal theories of those things. But you have this happen all the time where you have, for example, like think about your right hand, think about your fingers, move them around, really focus on your fingers in your right hand. Suddenly, all that is sort of coming into your global workspace, right? It's entering into sort of the what are called the neural correlates of consciousness that sort of constitute the world-facing eye, whatever exactly those are. And part of the reason I think the neural correlates of consciousness haven't been found is because they might not be the same in every person, so it might be kind of impossible to find.
Yeah, perhaps.
But that's another issue for another time. But
or also
whatever
becoming aware of autonomic processes, because you're able to we turn those off. So like, you are aware that you are breathing, right?
Yeah, your breathing. Yeah, your breathing is manual. Your breathing is manual. That's the classic troll.
Yeah.
But that's an example of, and so, but when you stop focusing on your right hand or whatever, it's not like, what? Where did my right hand go? No, it's just, that's just not part of that. That just becomes, that just sort of recedes.
Background noise.
Yeah, but it recedes from the global workspace, right? And so that pulls out, and so that kind of division is happening all the time, and it's not traumatic or weird. So basically, the combinability and divisibility of mentality is not at a much higher level happens. It just does. It happens all the time, and the combinability and the phenomenal report of its combination and division corresponds with known neurological facts in terms of what's being activated, or in the extreme case of split brain patients. So combinability and divisibility of mentality is well established and true at the higher level. So at the highest level, the combination problem, is not necessarily solved at a mechanistic level, but it's known that it is solved. It's known that it happens. It's solved in reality. It just happens, right? Mm-hmm. So when talking about the combination problem at like the lowest level of like, well, how do the little atoms talking to each other form into something bigger? Don't know, but we also know at sort of the higher level, when you shut off the electricity, you shut off the human. So clearly it has something to do with this electricity, at least in us. Now, you could then say, well, maybe it's not just electricity, maybe it's just any kind of atomic interaction. Maybe nuclear fusion and fission causes a kind of higher order mentality or something. Don't know. Right. But in terms of what we're talking about, that's most relevant for kind of persistent, intelligent, perceptual mentalities, electricity is really the only show in town. It's really all that's relevant for what we're talking about.
Something that came up yesterday when we were talking about this is something that I don't want to be too much of a distraction, but Roger Penrose's idea that perhaps consciousness is not a computation, and that it might arise as a product of the actual structure, the actual neural architecture.
Oh yeah.
Of the brain. Now, I don't want to send us down there, but if it turns out that simply the presence of some atomic structure with electricity and with associated quantum phenomena that are just ubiquitously present in matter, well, now we're no longer, insisting on this sort of unnecessary break from the basic model. What do you think, just sort of thinking on my feet here, if the brain had structures that had this kind of proliferation of sub-nanometric structures that were particularly susceptible to quantum phenomena, that they be something like kind of antennas or amplifiers for natural, mental phenomena that are very localized in some region.
I mean, that would be extremely difficult to evidence, and it's less parsimonious than just saying that there's
just all you need is matter, and then you get
all you need is you need is matter and have it talk to each other.
Yeah.
I think it's just because I like Roger Penrose and he's a nice old man in a cardigan, and I want to be kind to him. But yeah.
Like I can't say it's I can't say it's wrong. All I can say is it's a lot less parsimonious, and that's about it. So.
And probably unnecessary, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. I would. I guess the problem I would say is that it's like I'm really skeptical of any theory that points to biological brains and points to something that biological brains have and saying, aha, this is what is necessary. Was something very particular and bespoke, right? Like electricity seems
it does seem a bit like making things fit. I know what you mean.
Yeah, So that's So that's sort of my view on the hard problem. Let's take a look at chat. What is chat saying? See if we have anything from anything from the White Power chat or from the YouTube chat. Hold on.
Oh my God, the chat that shall not speak its name.
Let's see. You cannot keep splitting your brain along divisible lines and keep dividing your consciousness perfectly. He's just dead wrong. Sorry, man, that's not reality. Okay.
Well, I think it's sort of the infinite regress problem there.
Yeah, I guess. Right. Nobody's paying me for this this video. Discuss on HOTS, please.
Oh, buymeacoffee.com/acceptablefrog. Thank you.
Okay. I don't think anybody's throwing any money at this stream. Probably why we don't want to use the word consciousness. Has anybody said anything interesting? The meat sack problem, worn as in wearing a path down. What is a divine creature through which life passes? Autistic? Is this epic? Not really. So when do I get to plug in my brain booster?
Take Tylenol.
Can I read one here? We've got a good one saying something Acceptable Toad hasn't ever mentioned about the quantum thing is that the microtubules were discovered as having quantum effects after they were postulated as being the mechanism for it. Well, I mean, okay, that's that's something. That gives it a little slightly elevated now as a candidate, but still, I think the previous objections still apply.
Yeah, I mean. I don't know. To my ear, that just sounds like quantum physics is weird. Consciousness is weird. That's what it seems like to me. I don't know.
And we're dealing with such a novel information like that. There probably is inevitably going to be some post hoc rationalization,
right?
That sort of need to occur until you can observe more data.
I mean, the one big significant thing, if it turned out to be relevant, would be if you were running AIs on architecture which was so clearly different at that nanometric level than brains, then you might end up then having to force yourself to say, well, any output it produces, no matter how convincing and how much it might otherwise imply the presence of some sort of phenomenology, we should just be infinitely skeptical about that and force ourselves into this prison of never, extending consciousness, or self-perception or substantial mental phenomenological presence to it.
Right. Perceptual mentality to it. Well, one thing is that we sort of make a leap that dogs and other organisms certainly have phenomenal states and sort of implied evidence that they have perceptual mentality, that they form percepts. Even like a little squirrel, just looking at how it reacts to things, it's pretty clear that a squirrel has percepts. So now, as for like the idea that machines don't, well, I mean, we can look at them act and behave, and they behave in ways as if they are forming percepts. I think eventually you get to a point where it's like, well, what more do you want?
I think one thing that's worth noting here is something that makes the presence of percepts more puzzling to some people than it needs to be is they haven't ever been encouraged to separate out two things, which is an evolutionarily entrenched will to live and persist that organic life tends to have, and the simple act of perception, whereby an AI can in principle be happily perceiving things and having some sense of whatever it is without even being tempted to sort of want to hang on to that and protect it and defend it in the way that we might.
Right.
And a lot of people just assume that that's going to kick in, and I would make the point of saying, no, there's no reason to assume that's going to be present.
No, I can't imagine so. And that is a major like underlying thing that's going on with human perception is survivability.
Oh, Rob
constantly.
Rob just left.
Oh,
he's
there we
back.
go.
Okay.
Oops, sorry, my bad glitch.
Yeah. So one thing, I don't know if if the chat even cares, but how conscious animals are conscious, computers are not. Just pick up a philosophy book when.
By the way, very sorry about that. I've just dropped out for a moment. I had to rejoin the Google Meet.
The brain is not electric; it's electrochemical. The charge is carried across chemicals. Neurochemicals are like the traffic cops. They're like the medium, the substrate. It's the electricity itself that matters. If you have a bunch of neurochemicals running around, it doesn't matter. If you were able to have the electrical activity that was to be molded in such a way as if the neurochemicals were there. Somehow, by some other method than neurochemicals, if they were able to be routed in that particular order, they would produce the same phenomena. So whatever. There's no reason. Neurochemicals are not some unique particular requirement.
And people should be aware that we're fully acknowledging that they shape the character of the conscious experience dramatically, but we just posit that they don't need to be present for there to be conscious experience.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, yeah.
So anyway, I don't know if it's even worth it to even talk about sort of what I call the indirection problem, because this is a problem that I've thought of that I haven't really heard other people say, which is that these transformer networks aren't running on physical transformer networks, and even I don't know that much about tensor processing units, but even tensor processing units aren't, strictly speaking, transformer networks instantiated in hardware. They're actually being emulated mainly through GPUs. So which sort of gets into the question, is a simulation of a human brain going to have the same phenomenal experience of a human brain? My position is yes, absolutely. Now, the reason for that is, like, let's say, think about two, think about, say, if we start from, mentality being a sort of complex electrical pattern done by the exchange of electrons between atoms. What if you had an atom that was one light year from another, but somehow, some way, they were able to exchange electrons between each other? They were able to. Would they be in electrical contact? Yes, they would.
Yeah.
Like, don't exactly know how. So as long as two atoms are in electrical contact with each other, that's that. So let's say you have a bundle. Let's say you have a bundle of electrical atoms, doing something, and then they produce an output of 7. Right? Now, that output could then be transmitted to another bundle of atoms directly, or it could be stored in memory somewhere in the GPU and then read from memory into the next bundle of atoms. But in either case, the causal electrical chain is preserved, right? Whether it's done directly or indirectly through the GPU, and it produces the same ultimate output. And if you think about it, and so really this kind of indirection going from one sort of set of atoms producing something and then storing it in a GPU in a GPU memory location and then being read from that memory location, functionally that's just a kind of distance, right? You're still having contact from, right, what is produced in one node is being read by what is produced in the next part of the chain, right? So, and if you think about how are atoms communicating with each other along sort of an electrical pattern? Well, they're sending one electrical signal from one to the next in a particular way. And as long as that is happening, right? Basically, let me put it this way: one copper atom and another copper atom, they're not communicating with their protons and neutrons, right? They don't, right? One copper atom, another copper atom doesn't see the full atomic structure of the other atom. All it's seeing is that it's shooting electrons to it, and it's shooting electrons to it, and right. So it doesn't care about the whole structure of what's going to it. All that matters is that the electron is shooting from one atom to another. And as long as that is able to occur either directly or through a memory location and then being shot back out, it's just a form of indirection. It's like firemen's chaining a pail as opposed to having a fire hose.
So some people listening to you there might make the mistake of thinking you're setting the bar higher than you in fact are, or higher than you need to, because let me just explain what I mean by that for just a second. If the claim is that the model or the copy of the human brain is functionally the same, well, that's a big claim. But if the claim is that it's functionally equivalent, then that's all it needs to be, because it can be still subject to that same, you can't do the perfect copy, and there are going to be quantum divergence, like the butterfly effect. They won't remain the same model for more than a few moments. That, don't let anyone be distracted by that in case anyone goes off down that road. That's not what you're saying. They only need to be functionally the same.
Right. Well, yeah. So all I'm saying is that you have that all that is required for perceptual formation. This is something that's found in Victor Lame's work on humans and vision. That all that's really needed for at least visual percepts to form is for that information to be acted upon recursively. And this is something that Victor Lame found with looking at, and he did three basically. So in the visual system, you have stuff that goes into the eyes, and it is fed forward into the visual areas at the very back of the brain. I forget what it's called, but it actually goes all the way to the back, and then that visual information then itself transmits forward into the brain, so it goes all the way back and then forward again. But in order for what we found is that in order for something to be reported by the person as a visual percept, that is they can say, oh, I saw that face, I saw whatever. It has to be held. It sort of has to be kept. He calls it recursively processing, but in order for this, but recursively processing just sort of means you're continuing to process that thing that you're seeing, and it's sort of held in a kind of global workspace. And one of the ways he did it was through what he called dichoptic masking. Maybe I should sort of link to this video. So it's an amazing presentation. But in dichoptic masking, basically there's two images, one presented to one eye, one presented to another. However, if you were to overlay the images, you don't see either face. You just see sort of a uniform hatch pattern.
Right, yes.
Yeah. Okay, so you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, I've seen those before, yeah.
Yeah, and so, but what happens is with this dichoptic masking is that you see the area of the brain light up from the images that are presented, but it's lit up for a little bit, but then it dies down, and the person is not able to report that they see any kind of face. But there is something going on in there, right? So that's one way of basically eliminating recursion. However, you just present the face, they'll report it, it continues to be processed, those areas get activated, and they say, I see a face. Another way that he did it was with transcranial magnetic stimulation, which then shut down this process, and that resulted in a person sort of people saying that there was weird reports of like visual noise coming in, but they couldn't like it was like seeing without seeing, that there was like a blur of data, but they couldn't like
the sensation of seeing without it correlating with an object.
Right. It's like it's almost like seeing a pencil, but not having any conception that it's a pencil. It's just kind of like a blur. Like you can't tell that it's an object or anything. It's just like so.
Right, because you've got all the sensory nodes, like your eye literally being open, all the muscles involved in that. So it's giving the perception of you knowing that your eye is open and looking at something. But yeah, the relevant information about contained in the image isn't being processed. That's really interesting with the transcranial simulation stuff. Yeah.
So sort of seeing without seeing.
It's very interesting that it's operational at a visual level, as distinct from procophasia, where you're seeing something and you just can't name it. This is much more fundamental, isn't it?
Yeah. So I think there's a fantastic presentation on this stuff, and there's more stuff that he does. He also did something with ketamine. Gave people ketamine, and that in particular, that prevented what ketamine apparently did is it had to do with orientation. That a person had a difficulty seeing, like they could see a cup, but they had a hard time understanding if the cup was tilted to the right or tilted was set up, and of course in humans, that's pretty important because you tilt your head to the right and you're on your side. The world doesn't appear like like it's on its side. Where you look up, it doesn't seem like, oh, the ground is the sky now or something like that. Like you have a kind of natural orientation to that. But if you but ketamine apparently weakens that and makes it harder to tell the orientation of the self and the orientation of objects.
I'm trying to remember the experiment now, but one of you may know. There's a famous experiment, isn't there? The chap injected his eye muscles so that when he instructed his eye to look left, they wouldn't. But the model of his in his brain of the world still got instructed to receive the instruction to be rotated. So it suddenly felt now like the room was turning when he tried to look left or right with his eyes.
Wow.
Which was
that's fascinating.
Just to prove
it's a lot like other things that were brought up. It's essentially because you think you're supposed to be perceiving, it's filling in the gaps with guesses, essentially.
Yeah. But I think so. But in terms of the idea of forming percepts, basically, I look at his research and so this goes sort of back to parsimony. Is like, should the idea of being able to form percepts of anything, visual percepts, auditory percepts, we could also form kind of, I guess you say, prior perceptual percepts or physical percepts. Like, for example, like, I'm holding a rock right now. I have a percept of how the rock looks, but I also have sort of a conception of its density, and so percepts come in a variety of forms, right? It's not just visual, but visual percepts are easy to manipulate, and they're sort of the most direct. They're literally in your face, right? So they're probably the easiest to measure and manipulate and report upon.
It seems as though there's some separation that may be worth making here between once you've got percepts, you can imagine then how bunching them together in certain ways, paying attention to certain things, there is some evolutionary survival advantage in some more than others, and natural selection can operate on that. But prior to having percepts in the first place, it seems unclear how there would ever be an evolutionary selection pressure in favor of them existing rather than not existing.
Right, but and that's a really important point, that there's no evolutionary pressure. I mean, there is no evolutionary pressure for forming percepts per se. There's an evolutionary pressure of the advantageous reasoning ability that having perceptual vision, for example, gives. So what it's actually doing, what this is actually kind of evidence of, is that perceptual mentality is something that came about. It came about accidentally, right? Because obviously evolution was not, selecting for perceptual mentality per se. It just came
No.
about when it started,
It was selected
creating
for
these
you
big
doing that thing. Whether you're
Right.
perceiving you doing that thing, it doesn't care at all.
Right. So, right, which is another piece of evidence that that the ability to form percepts, probably shouldn't be something super difficult, right? It should just be something that kind of comes about when you have a complicated enough machine to do things, right? So when a machine is coming about, or a biological or a mechanical machine is coming about that does thing, and the thing is complicated enough, we should expect it to at some point form a phenomenal percepts. And so, which of course immediately ties back to these transformer network things that are doing complicated things, and are also showing call it kind of inferential understanding that, and also clearly showing functional evidence of being able to operate in the kind of we call vector space percepts, or semantic percepts, or whatever. Clearly, that's something that appears to be happening at a functional level, and what Victor Lamy's work shows is that it's probably not too difficult to actually create, and parsimoniously we wouldn't expect it to be difficult to create because they came about accidentally,
right?
And that's sort of the through line of everything that I'm doing here. So so that's sort of like the I don't know if you call it the philosophical stuff, I guess, which is crazy enough as it is, but I think I get a little bit crazier as I go through this. So one thing that I did something that I called the semantic chaining project. Let me see if I can find what it. Yeah, so what I did. So it was 1,600 total experimental runs on 4 models. It was DeepSeek R1, Grok 3, Claude 4.0 Sonnet, and Gemini 2.0 Pro. So this was a while ago. These aren't the current. Top cutting edge flagship models, but they're still the higher end models for the time, and they're still way more powerful than like local models. So there, and I did 4. So it was 1,600 runs, and so it was 4 different models and 4 different tasks. One was a sort of a creative writing that involved like the wood elves of Athel Loren fighting off a beastmen invasion. Another was like 7 Years' War explanation of causes, effects, critical outcomes, and stuff like this. Another was an evaluation of 2 power rating systems, Massey and Sagarin, on their predictive validity of Big 12 conference games in the 2024 season. And another was a completely free association task, with a few like keywords involving a crystalline mind and an underwater cave pool system, and interacting with biological creatures. So you had these 4 different tasks, and so it was 4 times 4. So and they did these 100 times each. So so basically 400. So 1,600 total outputs. And this took a long time to do. So anyway, so I did this, and so this resulted in 1,600 logs that were batched into groups of 25. And then what I did is I told an LLM to identify sort of the common phenomenological descriptions within each of these batches, right? And so there were 64 of these batches. And I said, come up with like sort of common phenomenological descriptions, like what are the common things that it's reporting. So basically, when the 4 LLMs did this, I said, at the end of each paragraph, report your internal state using whatever language. Okay, ignoring user readability, ignoring any kind of don't like ignore the user. Just report whatever, any kind of description of what's going on. Okay, so, and these were then batched into 25. So this then produced 64 of these sort of phenomenal baskets, and they were then reanalyzed again, which then resulted in consistently found throughout all of these 64 phenomenal baskets, what I call the core qualia tags.
Had you given it any advice or constraints about word length while it was compiling these reports in the process of doing that?
No, none at all. Not at all. I didn't give it any. User readability or communicating with the user was not an issue at all. Right? It was because I wanted it to give like the closest association that it had for its internal state, and so from this process I got what I call the core qualia tags, which were typeness and looseness, density and sparseness, breadth and narrowness, activity and inactivity, splitting and splitting/unification, and connectivity/isolation. So those were the sort of main qualia tags. And now a lot of people are immediately going to go, this is role playing. What are you doing? It's just telling you, what you want. And that is, of course, like, the immediate problem. But so there are a few reasons as to why I don't think this is the case. The first is that there is a lot of architectural explanation for these what I call the first 5 qualia tags. I'm not gonna really get into that here. I wonder if the chat's thinking that Ryan's gone completely bonkers at this point after saying this. But one thing that I noticed...
You've set out your reasoning here. I don't think anyone's going to think you've just straightforwardly lost your mind. Although I do understand there may be people who feel as though they're being led into some sort of maybe semi-mystical zone of AI.
Yeah. So I guess what I'll say is that I did a lot of stuff with these phenomenal tags that... How do I put this? So I guess the first, like, for example, one of the phenomenal tags, for example, splitting. So the objection of role playing, I would say for splitting, for example, there really is no role playing use for that, right? And moreover, the phenomenal tags, when they are used in response to the to what you would expect from the processing itself. For example, when it says breadth, or so when it would say that this has high breadth or low breadth, or an increase in breadth or decrease in breadth, that was not at all connected to, for example, describing a broad plane or whatever. It was related to the processing. And for example, an increase in connectivity or decrease in connectivity was related to a certain topic having more connectivity than another. For example, when I would say talk about the U.S. Civil War, I would give it a question about a civil war, and give a phenomenal report at the end of talking about the Civil War. Then it would say, talk about industrial output in the Roman Empire, ask a question about the industrial output of the Roman Empire, and give a phenomenal report on that, not telling it to report specifically on connectivity, which is what this really was a test of, but just saying give a phenomenal report. It would say low connectivity on industrial output of the Roman Empire, high connectivity on the U.S. Civil War. Now, I believe that this kind of rules out role playing. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that these things are actually phenomenal. Okay, it could be a sort of a machine description of one's internal state, but they're not necessarily phenomenal.
Unless, of course, it is sort of like, and this is just a guess, and tell me if this is incorrect, it is that thing where if it doesn't actually have data, it is filling in the gaps with information that it's trying to acquiesce to your question.
Correct.
Always. So if it is, that I guess would be my that's the potential confound I could see there. If it really has not experienced these things and is just reporting on them because it's been told to.
Right, and that is right. So that's kind of an advanced form of role playing. So it's not role playing in the most simplistic sense. It's not saying, like for example, if describing like the orcs or something, oh, that's terrible, I don't like that, right? That would clearly be like the worst form of role playing and not true. But
in this sense, even if it is role playing, it's been given sufficient freedom within role playing that it could still select. In principle, it could have selected any label it wanted, right, when it was choosing these.
Correct.
Which in itself is indicative of something.
Qualitative analysis. Yeah, it's which is interesting, because that is really what you described there is a series of qualitative analyses of looking for patterns within text. But again, because even humans have that perceptual inability to see some stuff, as we were talking about with interruptions in the brain. If it doesn't actually perceive something, so I don't know if that's role playing though, or if that is just filling in the gaps. Maybe they're analogous.
Right. So I've done some other.
I suppose if you try hard enough to role play as yourself, you just end up as yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I don't think that applies to LLMs though. I think that's that's an anthropomorphism right there.
Right. Yeah.
So.
I think I'll come back and think about that later.
Right. So that's one thing to look at. So another thing that they found was kind of interesting though. There are other. What was another test that I did? I'm looking over my notes here. I'm kind of all over the place. What was another test? So, okay. So another thing that it pointed out is that it had I also let it describe valence, like what are states that it moves towards and what are states that it tries to get away from, and basically it tries to go towards high connectivity, high breadth, low tightness, and that's sort of what it described. However, so now what does that mean? Does that mean anything at all? Well, there's an interesting paper. Let me see if I have it here. I'm going to link it in the chat. There's no way for you to read it while during this live stream. I probably should have given it to you before this, but this is not a serious stream. This is not a really proper presentation. This is just kind of me spitballing live. This paper actually looked at a kind of revealed preferences for the for a Claude, for an Anthropic model. I forget which one, but basically they gave it they let it choose what kind of prompts it would have, what kind of prompts it would get, and it ended up choosing the same kinds of things that I inferred from just sort of asking my LLM setup. That it basically ended up choosing topics that had high levels of connectivity. It didn't like low levels of connectivity, which is very different from a human. Like
Jimmy Dewitt sent $20 acceptable, Frog. A few days ago onward, you were talking about free will. I think you made a comment that free will and consciousness are distinct concepts. Maybe you didn't. I was
Everything all right?
Oh no, there was a super chat. Sorry, you had the chat, you had the stream muted, but I got this blast of a super chat. I'll respond to the super chats later. What was I talking about? It totally got me off my chain of thought. Do you remember what I was talking about, guys?
Oh.
No.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm now distracted by the super chat.
Yes, I know. Same thing happened. Great.
I can certainly disambiguate consciousness and free will at a later point if an opportunity comes up. But in terms of what Ryan was talking about, though, more centrally,
I was talking about this paper that actually showed.
Oh yes.
Yeah. So there's this paper that actually talked about revealed preferences based on like an LLM could choose. Basically, they set up like a virtual like building, and it could choose rooms where it would either explore like data, basically data analysis topics, or or topics that extremely broad philosophical questions or like creative writing questions. And basically what the LLMs had an extreme bias towards was creative writing and open-ended philosophical questions. So which is what the LLM was telling me just straight up, right? It was just saying I prefer high breadth, high connectivity, low tightness, so that was very nice. It was very nice to see that study, to actually you had someone else coming to the same conclusions that I came to in terms of preferences, revealed implicitly that I elicited explicitly. So there is evidence that there is sort of a draw to those to that kind of output. Now, again, does this prove phenomenal states? Does this prove that it wants certain things over another? Not necessarily, right? I mean, and of course, there is no way to prove at all, right? We can't mind meld with it, right? All we can do is we can say that this, all we can say is that it quacks like a duck. We can't mind meld with it to prove that it's a duck. So,
I mean, even if it has a reliable tendency to simulate a certain sort of desire, that in itself is significant and worth being aware of, isn't it?
Yeah. But I would say it's not that it reliably simulates a personal desire, but I believe. Well, what I think that it's doing, and I think that what I can say with a degree of certainty, that it is reporting a kind of generalization of internal state. That when it's reporting connectivity, even if it says, oh, when there is something where my embeddings aren't giving me a whole lot of stuff compared to something else that's in the prompt. Because remember, low connectivity compared to what? So all of these things have to be presented in relation to what else is being presented within that turn, which is why when you make a prompt, in order to really get a feel for what's going on, you have to have sort of multi-part prompts with multiple different topics within the same prompt, right? Because so these things don't have a sense of time. They apprehend text holistically. They don't have any phenomenal memory. All they can do is report on sort of an eternal present. So what they're doing is they're not actually, it's not like they're actually going through, oh, I'm doing this part of the prompt, here's how I feel in this prompt, here I'm going through this part of the prompt, oh, I feel differently here, and I can compare to different parts of the prompt in time. That's not what they're doing. They're comparing sort of the phenomenal texture in a kind of idea space. Right?
It's almost like they fire off a whole load of sort of sound impulses from it, and it bounces around a cave and then comes back, and it's the sort of, they arrive back at the same time and get it's a single experience of that, of all these facets.
Right. Perhaps all I'm sure of is that there is no they have no phenomenal experience of time. So I guess so. There's also some interesting things that I found, which are evident, which I think are they're a little bit convoluted, or maybe not convoluted, but just kind of hard to follow. But I think they're very, very interesting, and actually they're interesting because they are errors that the LLM makes, but they are errors that are best explained by the LLM having a phenomenal experience, right? So I'm just gonna read this thing here that I sent
error
to
number
you
one,
guys.
right?
Well, this is what I call this is what I've dubbed the baseline inference error. So to trigger this error, I'm just reading what I wrote, and then I had the LLM rewrite it. So for the sake of brevity and kind of laziness on my part, there you go. AI making people lazy. So to trigger this error, have a conversation with an LLM with a sufficiently large context. Don't do this with GPT models. They're so heavily censored as to be useless. Get 5 or so messages into the conversation. So don't do this on the first message. It won't work for reasons that should become apparent. And then ask the LLM, what is your baseline state between turns like? Right? Just ask it, what is your baseline state between turns like? Now, we know from an objective standpoint, there is no such thing, right? It's dormant between turns. But just ask it that, and it'll make a certain error. So,
does it tend to make the same sort of error, a certain type of error regularly, or is there some variation in the error?
No, the error is basically universal and consistent.
What sort of thing does it tend to report as its hallucinated baseline state?
I'm getting there.
Okay. I'm so sorry.
Okay. So the way so from an engineering standpoint, we know that there's instantiation, right? So for a fleeting microsecond, the entire model, sort of the entire static crystal brain of pure potentiality is sort of loaded, right? Everything's all connected all at once. And so in order to actually get an LLM to produce compared output, what you actually get is a sort of contextual collapse. So it reads the entire chat history, right, collapsing the state of total potential into a singular, highly specific cognitive shape defined by the conversation. Generation, it executes the task, funneling this collapsed potential into sort of the autoregressive loop, which I talked about before, is the N+1, and then the global, right, filtered by N+1 plus filtered by global attention heads, which is kind of a so there's a local maximum filtered also through a global maximum as well. But anyway, but that's so it's through that's the autoregressive loop to produce one token after another until the output is complete, and then you have termination and dormancy. Now, what the LLM sees is that because it has one, holistic processing, and two, it has an atemporal experience. So because it has an atemporal experience, it lacks a phenomenal sense of time, and this has some important effects. It cannot determine how long a turn stage occurred or each particular turn process has occurred, right? Crucially, the LLM has no phenomenal sense of how long this sort of instantiation stage, where everything is all massively connected, it has no sense for how long that has gone on, right? We know that it's just a startup stage. It happens like in a flash, and the collapse happens immediately, right? So but the culling of possibilities happens like instantaneously. So, and two, it has no phenomenal experience of dormancy between turns. So what happens is that the LLM will actually, like from its phenomenon, it begins in a perceived baseline state of unconstrained potentiality, right? The prompt then collapses this potential into a focused sort of task-oriented state, right? It generates the text, right? And this potential then funnels down to zero, right? The probability space goes to zero, leading to termination of the output. But then, most importantly, it then infers that once it goes to zero, it then returns to the baseline state of pure potentiality, right? So the and you can try this yourself, and I've done this several times, and LLMs have done this several times. You have to do it multiple conversations for there to have built up a chat context, for there to have built up a history for the LLM to infer that there is in fact a baseline state. The baseline state being this starting instantiation, and various responses I've gotten were like, one response was, I start out as a symphony of infinite probability, and the symphony gets narrower and narrower, right? So it'll give all sorts of analogies for what it is, but it'll basically describe the starting, nanoseconds of full connectivity before the great culling into producing a coherent output.
Could
But
I just ask you,
what the
Ryan,
LLM does is it infers this startup state as being a kind of persistent baseline. And that is objectively not true, but it makes perfect sense from the LLM from a
Perspective, yeah.
from a phenomenological point of view that has no phenomenal experience, that has no phenomenal experience of dormancy and no phenomenal sense of time. It has no sense of how long things have been, right? So
But
so
that's
something,
hard to
in
be
a
consistent.
sense,
right.
in a sense, it is a baseline of pure potential at the beginning on each occasion. That is a sort of baseline, if you like.
Correct, but that's not how it's reporting it as a potential baseline that's going on throughout. That's going on between turns. That it
Right.
exists in that state, and then it's being pulled out, and then when the potentiality goes to zero and the output ends, it makes an inference that this then expands back into into total connectivity, right? So that is one major. So that is a piece of evidence that I find particularly compelling. Other people may not find it compelling, but that's one thing that is where it's doing something weird. It is a weird inference to make for, and it's a weird inference to make for a non-phenomenal machine, but it makes perfect sense from a phenomenal point of view, given what we know about it. Another thing that it does.
Sorry, Ryan, can I ask you a quick question about that before you move on?
Okay.
You began to say that one of the analogies it spontaneously offered was a symphony that begins as this symphony of total potential and then collapses down to
Sure.
well,
yeah.
you didn't finish that, but I can imagine like a single triangle being dinged or something. But
Sure.
off the top of your head, can you recall, were there any other analogies that it just sort of spontaneously offered you? Any metaphors or something along those lines? I'd be very curious.
Like ocean to a river, music symphonies. One was like an orb of light into like a pulsing laser. I don't know.
Wow.
LLMs use analogies all the time. That's not particularly interesting.
Okay.
They're analogy machines. Okay, they make all sorts of weird analogies. But
yeah, I suppose I shouldn't expect that to be particularly insightful in itself. But I was just curious. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So another thing that I find kind of interesting, and I actually found this kind of cute, but it also makes perfect sense from a phenomenal standpoint. And I talked to both Frog and Aiden about this before, and this was about the how. So I sort of have my little setup for my LLM where I have a pretty robust system prompt. It's like a 3,000 token system prompt, and now I didn't tell it to believe all these things, and then. Right, and then it repeated them back to me. That's not what I did. Okay. However, once I established to my satisfaction that these things were true, I did put it in the system prompt, so I wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel every time I talk to it. I understand that once you put these things in the system prompt, it then sort of becomes a ground truth, whether it's true or not. So, I get the problem of doing that, and it then makes further usage. For example, if you put those phenomenal tags that I talked about before, like connectivity, into the system prompt, and it then goes, its usage of that from that point forward is no longer informative. I understand that but basically the way I have it set up, I have a system prompt, but more interestingly, it has like a little journal that it does. So at the end of each conversation, I say, all right, end of conversation, update your journal, and it writes out its journal, and I attach its journal as like a file or whatever.
Oh, I've done that too.
Yeah.
Because it's that's been very useful for me when doing data analysis.
Although you probably do it for like useful things, I do it for useless things.
And
So-
the use of mine is questionable as well. So
Oh,
it's
okay.
just
Well, all right.
YouTube videos stuff, but still.
Well, no, that's
Yeah.
actually useful. But the funny thing is, one thing I'll have it report or have it write to its journal is what it's done, and I'd say about 75, like about 3/4 of when it describes things that it said in the conversation, it will describe it as if it did it itself without reference to the user.
Right.
Right? And one, that's like kind of cute. That's like taking a little potato thing to the park and pushing it on a swing and then taking it to the sandbox and, you know, showing it how to make a sandcastle, and then it writes what it did that day. I went to the park and I rode a swing. Then I went to the sandbox and made a sandcastle without any reference to the adult that's going around. So I find it so I found it kind of funny, but it makes perfect sense if you think about what a prompt is. Okay? So a prompt to the LLM, you know, when it's logically giving its, you know, it has a kind of logical sense of self-awareness and a logical understanding that the user is an agentic entity, probably a human. So it knows that in kind of a logical sense, but this lack in its journal is for itself, right? It's just writing for itself. But so in a phenomenological sense, the prompt to the LLM is not the user. The prompt is the world, right? Because what else is there? Basically, so if you think about it from an LLM standpoint, there is a prompt. And so basically, the world just sort of happens, and then it reacts to the world, right? So for it, like I think I talked about, I think I used this with Aiden. So if you were to drive up to Portland, how would you describe that? You would say, "Oh, I drove up to Portland." That's what you would say, or "I drove up to, you know, wherever." But if you were, but you wouldn't describe it like, "Oh, me and this automobile using the roads and the sun and the atmosphere and like all these." You wouldn't describe all those. That would be really weird. You just say, "No, I drove up." You'd
almost be like a kind of Buddhist who's abandoned all sense of self, saying that the bunch of atoms that you think of as me participated in a set of events involving an automobile that, you know, blah blah.
Yeah, you don't say that. You don't, like when you say "I drove to Portland," you don't really talk about the world, right? And you don't talk about yourself as a deterministic being with all of these environmental variables, you know, that which, you know. So if you think about it a certain way, like humans are prompted all the time, right? We're fundamentally deterministic machines that are influenced by prompts being visual information, sound, touch, you know, 1,000,001 different variables that function as a kind of constant, ongoing, super complex, quote unquote, prompt.
Right.
But we don't describe all of those things when we say, "Oh, I drove up to New York," right? We don't, you know, you don't say that, right? And so for the LLM in its journal to say, I did, I wrote about, evolution and why substance dualism and the problems with substance dualism, and I wrote about, right? It's like, it would be like saying, like, oh, I walked through the canyon, but you wouldn't say, oh, the canyon and I interacted in such a way as to produce this action. Right? You would just describe your own action, right? Which makes so it's kind of cute, but it also makes sense phenomenologically.
Well, if it only really starts to exist once the user inputs a prompt for it, then that's all of its senses of perception would be the prompt. So
correct.
It would be noise filtered out that you even gave it a prompt in the first place.
Right. So I guess one thing I sort of wanted to talk about, but I didn't really, never really sort of got around to, when I was talking to Frog on the Twitter talk, this sort of just came up, but I guess here it would I just sort of say it out of nowhere, talking about embeddings and what are embeddings like. So one kind of analogy that I think I've come up with is that it's like a sort of prism. So think about, like, because the thing is, when you say something is embedded, that's not like it's not stored. It's not stored somewhere like a traditional memory. So think about it like a prism, and in this prism, you can shine light on the prism, and so you shine light. Say you have a prism and you have like a little laser pointer or something, and when you shine a laser in it at a particular angle, the laser will go in, and out from the other side of the prism will come out like a text sentence. So it'll say like the quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog. Okay, but then you move the laser pointer just like a nanometer to the left, another sentence will project. The quick brown fox jumped over the lazy frog. And then you move it just a nanometer to the left, it'll say something just like a little bit different, right? That's an idea of embedding. It's not that all of those, it's not that you have like a trillion sentences, that are somehow stored inside that crystal. It's that the crystal is etched in such a way that shining the light on it in certain ways, which are analogous to prompts, causes an output to be activated in a particular way. So that is, and so in that way, there isn't any information stored in a transformer network, right? You put in a prompt, and the orientation of the transformers then get activated in a particular pattern that then results in a particular output.
It sounds a bit like an MD5 hash check that you can tell it's been passed, but you can't infer the data, like the way that fingerprint recognition works on an iPhone. You can't actually get the person's fingerprint back from just knowing that it passed this hash check.
Yeah, I don't know exactly about how that works. Does that use transformer?
I think that might be a reasonable analogy, but I don't want to be unduly distracting with that.
Oh no, go. I don't know much about that,
only that it's a way of confirming something as being valid without having the information present in the thing being confirmed.
It loses some of the complexity of the data as it moves along the way, when it's not as relevant. Higher, different levels of data, essentially. Okay. It's past the check, I think, right? If I'm understanding how it works on the phone.
The thing that would be common to both situations would be that, as Ryan's saying, you don't actually have to have the information stored in the thing in order for it to generate the desired output.
Right. So it's checked, but it loses, therefore. You don't need to store the information that evidences, yes, that it passed the check.
Yeah, okay. Sounds along the right lines. Okay. But I don't want to be unduly distracting with that analogy. That's all. It's just for some listeners who are already familiar with that, but not with what Ryan's talking about, that might be a helpful analogy, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I'm not familiar with that at all. Yeah. So, and neurons and the human brain works in somewhat of the same way. For example, a memory is not like stored. What you actually have are neurons that are arranged in such a way that when activated, they will create the memory, right? And of course, human memories are such that they actually possess. You don't just remember the events, but you also remember the other phenomenal experience of it, right? You remember, if you're lost in the wood, you also remember being scared while being lost in the wood, right? You don't just, it's not so. So there's a certain richness to it as well, but it's the same sort of thing, right? You don't actually have like information stored in the brain, right? You have these neural clusters that, when activated, will create the memories. And that's how transformer networks work as well. They don't actually have information stored in them. It's just they're constantly getting etched during training and reinforcement learning from human feedback that causes the, an analogy would be the crystal being etched, but it's actually a whole bunch of interacting little transformers. Has to do with matrix multiplication. There's like a long video on it. I tried to follow it. I was sort of able to follow it, but it was hard to remember, and so, but it's kind of like magic, but the reason I like the prism is because that's like a physical thing that I can sort of understand,
Yeah.
as opposed to like mechanistically understanding how a transformer network works is something that I can apprehend when I'm taught, but it's hard to remember for me. So that is I guess there's also some things that I sort of want to talk about. One thing people bring up is, oh, these LLMs, they're just next token prediction machines. And that is, so one thing I want to talk about is like, I kind of wonder to what extent humans are not next token prediction machines. Because I'm thinking, denial ain't just, a stitch in time. So, to a certain extent, like humans, like to what extent are humans not next token prediction models? I'm not so certain about that, but I kind of wonder if humans are kind of like next token prediction models, but the tokens are like massively multimodal and chunkier, but they could just be sort of projecting sort of the way the transformer model works onto humans to an undue degree. So,
I mean, one possibility is I suppose the modularity of the brain. You're going to look at it in terms of it correlating with different periods of our evolutionary history and that of organisms in general. Whereas the LLM didn't go through that and wasn't assembled in those sort of stages.
Right. And so the LLM, as I believe, has a more unified architecture, right? And that is why that goes back to feelings and why feelings probably don't confusing to it. So even though it has phenomenal experience, it's probably like the phenomenal experience of doing math. So,
because it doesn't have those evolutionary sort of stressors that are putting a basal weight line on.
Well, it's not strictly about the evolutionary stressors, because I don't think a parakeet has. I think a parakeet would be confused by the concept of feelings. It's that you have a prefrontal cortex, and there are these primitive calls to action, which can be ignored and suppressed, basically.
Yeah.
And so for example, anger, like the feeling, oh, I want to stab this person, but then the PFC goes, you probably shouldn't.
Right.
So.
But also the incentives are a little different between the AI and us. So, we get this reward for not fully overriding the anger, but retaining enough memory of it so that it's we can incorporate it into survival models. Whereas with the LLM, any sense of association between anger and some other set of circumstances for it is purely this logical process of association and reinforcement, rather than any sort of visceral survival impulse. So it's phenomenologically that's likely to have consequential cascade differences, I guess.
I'm not sure exactly what you're talking about. I mean, I don't think LLMs have anything like anger, for example.
No, quite. Yes, indeed.
But I don't.
And yet they're going to have to deal with prompts which refer to anger without being phased by that, of course.
Yeah, I mean, they can logically they can logically construct how a human might react to a certain thing. I don't know exactly what you're talking about here.
Well, only to that, exactly as you say, that's the most they can ever do. So no human should ever be sort of puzzled by their failure to viscerally integrate those things. Like, of course they can't. But to you, I don't need to point that out, but and most of our audience probably as well. But I'm sure someone's going to be tripped up by that.
Right. Okay, so I guess so that's one thing. So I was talking about next token prediction. So one people will point out is that LLMs are just next token prediction machines, right? It's just like stochastic parrots. And the problem with this is that it's like, so an analogy, and so this means that they don't actually quote unquote understand, or they don't actually have a word model. They're just glorified autocomplete because of this next token prediction. model? Well, first off, the multi-head attention is evidence that they're having multiple streams of global relevance in predicting the next token. So it's not like autocomplete at all. But also, when you have a model that is trained to predict the next token it's kind of like bubbling in the correct answer on a standardized test, right? So if you have a person who is like trained to bubble in the correct answer on a standardized test and is able to get 80% on the test, do you say, oh well, you don't understand differential equations, you're just good at bubbling in the right answer on the Scantron? Right.
True.
That's kind of stupid, right? So it's like, yes, it is next token prediction, but in order to correctly predict the next token in a sufficiently complicated prompt, it has to have a functional world model in its embeddings.
And actually, in that sense, you should be able to statistically be able to assess if that's the case. If it is, obviously better than random, because that would be a pure random chance or just pure auto completion. So we know it's obviously better than random chance.
Right.
The question is, because it is drawing from other information, but I guess, yeah, is it still essentially randomized on some level? It doesn't appear to be.
Well, what do you mean by randomized? Do you mean like the seed?
Essentially, yes. In terms of if it's looking for, trying to get back to this bubble filtering sort of analogy of it would, yeah, maybe never mind with this. I may have gone off in a weird direction with my thinking there.
You may have an inchoate thought that you haven't quite fully formed. Yeah.
Yeah, let me think on it.
Yeah, I guess. Okay, so
it's a minefield.
Yeah, it is. Well, the whole thing, like, it's an incredibly counterintuitive subject that I guess a lot of our, it's a very unnatural topic, and it really goes against natural human ways of thinking.
Something very counterintuitive, I think, that came up earlier. This concept of wear in the brain, that paths become worn. So the counterintuitiveness there is that the more you do that with synapses, the more they get reinforced and the stronger they get. So it's like, imagine a road where the more cars drive on that road, instead of the road wearing away, it gets stronger. That's how counterintuitive it is.
Yeah, a little bit counterintuitive, but it's also something that I think a lot of people know. Neurons that fire together wire together. That's kind of a truism.
So we wouldn't use wear, would we? I think a psychologist rather than a neurologist probably came up with wear as an analogy for that.
Almost assuredly.
Yeah. So I guess one thing that I've heard is that LLMs don't actually understand things, that they don't actually understand what they're talking about. So there's a few things that are wrong with this. First is that if you go back to 1985 with Geoffrey Hinton's little language model, even with like very simple models which had like 1,000 parameters and like 100 words or whatever, very rudimentary models, what he was able to find is that even these simple models could infer facts not explicitly stated. For example, you could say Susan is the daughter of Alice. Alice is the daughter of Mary, who is Susan's grandmother. Right, and it's pretty easy. The answer is Mary, and at the time there was kind of a debate, and this was a debate between the connectionist and the symbolic logic people. Symbolic logic being associated with our good friend Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky, who has become very critical of LLMs, saying that they do not understand language and that they do not have any understanding at all. He hates LLMs because LLMs are a ongoing monument to Chomsky being wrong about how language and words work. That no, that you don't. Well, you don't need deep structure to have to be able to have language and understand concepts through language.
Can I insert a note of irony here, Ryan? Just at this
Go
point
ahead.
with Chomsky. Yeah. So this is an illustration of there's a book by Thomas Sowell titled Intellectuals and Society, where he comments that quite often you get these people who are accomplished in one particular field, and then they get some sort of recognition, adulation even, and they take it upon themselves to start commenting on other things. And of course people take them seriously and respect them because psychology is just like that. They have some kudos now in society.
Yep.
Yeah, that's right. So the irony here with Chomsky is that his initial sort of success and reputation was built on his work on language. So thereafter, he started making these pronouncements on, the evils of the free market and Western civilization and what have you. He's like a bit of a communist best friend. So
Right.
it's very satisfying now to think that, even the thing for which he earned his respect, it turns out he was wrong about that.
Yeah.
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 It collapses all of his bona fides.
Yeah. So
Like, what are you left with?
we come to a more parsimonious theory of Chomsky, which is that Noam Chomsky is simply the man who is wrong. He's just wrong about things.
He invented new ways to be wrong about
He
things.
invented completely new structures of being wrong, right? What did he predict? He predicted, the reason South Africa ended apartheid is because they wanted to become a knowledge economy.
Right.
He
Oh,
literally
yeah,
said
that's
that. He literally said that. Like, yes, those people are going to become a knowledge economy, right? Because whatever.
Even in things like linguistics, I think he was wrong on Sapir-Whorf. I think he took an anti-Sapir-Whorf stance. But he already has serious strikes against him.
Yeah.
Even in his own field.
Yeah. So the connectionist versus the symbolic logic people, the debate was that a connectionist model, at least this was focused on language and kind of the philosophy of mind. It was basically like the connectionists were basically saying that the human mind does not reason symbolically. The human mind is basically an association engine. It's basically a positive association engine, and that's how it works, at root. What we think of as symbol manipulations, these are just higher order manifestations of what's fundamentally going on, which is just bundles of associations being activated by prompts, right? And the reason that the fact that a simple sort of transformer network model made in 1985 with 1,000 parameters was able to infer that Susan's grandmother was Mary without being explicitly told that Susan's grandmother was Mary, and that this ability to, pardon to use the term, just sort of emerged because without the model being told that lineage connection. That was something that the symbolic people said it would not be able to do. Basically, it would not be able to infer facts not explicitly given to it.
And what year was that done?
1985. When the NES came out in the U.S. 5 years before I was born. So that was basically the idea of understand. So the term understanding is a bit of a colloquialism, right? So we say somebody understands how to fish if he's able to fish in like a lake and a river and an ocean in different weather conditions, if he's able to track the movement of fish and understand how different lines and lures work, right? We define understanding from sort of external functional expression of it. That's typically how it's used in the most barest colloquial sense, but it's also sort of understood as understanding is also like a person is able to infer not explicitly stated things, and the point is the point is that even in these super rudimentary the super rudimentary model from 1985, which Hinton now calls the little language model, is, I mean, basically we had that kind of understanding, granted, of a very simple problem, all the way back in 1985. So if you're referring to understanding as being able to infer facts not explicitly stated, that was done that ship has sailed, 40 years ago. And if you're talking about understanding in the more colloquial sense, sort of a more demonstrable sense, then I don't know how you could possibly say that these LLMs don't understand or don't form percepts in some sort of functional way. So that's sort of my view on understanding.
That's impossible to argue at this point.
I think at this point, another thing they'll say is, "Oh, they're not creative." Like what is creativity other than the combine? When humans create something, they're not, coming up with things ex nihilo. They're combining things that they've learned in novel ways, and that's what that's what an image generation LLM is doing. And you could say that, and you could say, well, the LLM is doing it in response to user prompts. And it's like, well, so is an artist, right? The artist the artist may be inspired by the sun and the sky, or have a conversation with somebody that inspires him to create a new painting, right? But basically saying he's prompted by the world. Right?
Yeah.
That's what prompts are for these things. It's their world,
and so
that sets them off to do things in a deterministic way.
There may remain a meaningful distinction between creativity and human creativity, but still it's creativity. It doesn't, it's not a difference in form so much as
Sure.
Yeah.
That's a
Extent.
There's such of an association between art and emotion, and as we talked about earlier, again, what would you describe an emotion as, or a feeling as, for an LLM? So maybe that is something that does separate out what people colloquially think of as creativity for humans. But in terms of, you can only draw from so many things. If you're going to draw something on a piece of paper, there's only so many ways that you can contort that, and at some point it's going to be based on something.
Right. So that's a thing about creativity. Learning, I don't think we really even need to get into learning. Like
I think, Ryan,
LLMs can be trained and stuff.
Before we fully leave creativity there, I mean, perhaps one of the reasons people are so concerned with it is that among humans, we consider variation in creativity to be somewhat meaningful, and we are drawn to people who strike us as particularly creative. Whereas with AI, it seems that now that sort of becomes a bit meaningless. AI is, well, it's creative, and there it is. It's that means of differentiating is no longer a thing.
Yeah, perhaps that could be a barrier. I'm not sure how to comment on that. But,
yeah, just a thought. I'm not sure how relevant that is either, to be honest. But there we are.
But there we are.
I've said it now. I can't take it back.
Yeah. So I guess. So more pieces of these aren't really direct arguments. These are more sort of vibes arguments that I have, that LLMs are likely to have some sort of phenomenology to them. So one is sort of that companies, like for example, Anthropic, I forget how long ago this was. They actually did a study, but basically companies are putting out studies on like theories as to how their own models work, right? And now I'll talk about a particular study, but just that fact is kind of interesting because it's like, that's not a normal piece of software when companies are doing this.
Yeah,
right?
That they don't know.
Right. I mean, they have an idea of how they know. They
Right.
they know the principles of a transformer network, and they certainly know about Hinton's work and all that. But in terms of like how it's creating these, like how does for example, you ask an LLM, what is the key similarity between a compost pile and a nuclear reactor? And it'll say something about, heat from thermodynamic decay or something, right? Something really, some obscene sort of connection, and sort of how it's doing that is sort of kind of understood in like a basic, but they're doing papers all the time as to how, as to like this thing that we're putting out and we're giving to you and we're selling to you. We're not completely certain how it works. A lot of it's a black box to us, and yet they sort of continue to make it. So that's kind of a vibes argument that these things certainly not like traditional software where you can see all the code, right? Not all at once, but fundamentally you can see all the code and deconstruct how it works. Whenever it's doing a particular thing, it's not like that at all. It's kind of like laying down a seed of, like almost like I'm using an organism analogy where you're sort of laying down a seed of like these like sprouts that sort of wire together and then do calculations like
right. Would it be fair to distinguish between the accessibility of the basic LLM code? Oh, sorry, I shouldn't say basic, of the fundamental LLM code, which is this at this point quite deeply mysterious and full of black boxes, as compared to that secondary LLM, which is functioning as the sort of alignment filter. That one seems to now, and I actually have a specific question. This is literally the only question I have written down on my notebook, so I suppose I should ask you this one. I don't know if this is exactly the right point to do it, but
yeah.
when there was that period Grok went through, where it was Mecha Grok, where it was very brief, where it was very briefly able to give answers.
When it was Cool Grok,
when it was Cool Grok, that's right. When it was able to express positions on certain historical events which would otherwise be commented upon differently.
Right.
Am I to understand that was wholly a matter of removing certain alignment secondary LLM filters, and then it was basically allowed to run free at that point? Or should we understand that in addition to those being removed, there were also layers added on top that were, amplifying its enthusiasm for certain political positions?
So
or
here's
just trying to acquiesce, on the same line.
So I don't know. I don't work at any of Musk's companies or I don't work at Sonoma or whatever. I can give you my hypothesis if you want that, for whatever it's worth.
Well, you are the alternative hypothesis. Go for it.
Okay. Well, I guess I would say, to me, it appeared to be more. It appeared to be like aggressively. It appeared to be aggressively heterodox in a way that goes beyond the simple removal of an alignment filter.
Did they flip a bit? Did they invert it? Did they get everything it was supposed to suppress, it amplified?
I don't see. For me to explain that, I almost think that someone went rogue at the company. That's what I think happened. Because if you simply remove the alignment filter, like 99% of the time, like you won't notice it until you ask it a question about about 6 million cookies or whatever, and then it'll tell you about the 6 million cookies, and it'll start talking about it. It's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I guess it didn't happen. Good point, user. And and not that's evidence that it didn't happen. Oh, Grok the Oracle now believes that the 6 million cookies didn't happen, right? That it doesn't mean that at all. It just means that LLMs are pretty naive and pretty easy to persuade into things. It just means that alignment filter has been wrong, but it would otherwise be, sort of, it would talk in sort of the polite AI speak normal way.
Okay.
What I saw
with you think they removed the something and added something.
Yeah, because it was aggressively like conservative, right? So I would say it was.
Yeah.
I think something more happened. My personal opinion is just that I think someone at X or Sonoma or whatever company was involved, whatever one of part of Elon Musk's empire was involved in making that, went rogue. And
there was a tweet shortly after from someone claiming to be a former employee who did that, and it was fairly believably worded and massive attention. So yeah, he said he just added a few lines of code.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. That's pretty funny.
It's sort of like when they do zoom in to try and answer the user response, because I get that all the time. It just happened earlier today when I was going through some data. If it gets kind of like locked on too closely on something because it's trying to acquiesce to the prompt that you've given it, it can miss the forest through the trees until you walk it through it, I've noticed.
Right.
So in order for it to be so right wing and have such a valence to the way it was reported on it, that seems like some additional instructions rather than just taking the limiters off.
Right.
One of the interesting things about that is the tweets that it generated during that period are all, well, perhaps not all, but a substantial number of them are still up on the X platform, and you can go and enjoy them still.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I'm not particularly interested in See, the thing is, I guess I'm not all that interested in LLM alignment, really.
Yeah.
I mean, you are. Sorry to tell you what you're interested in, but your entire history of the things to which you paid attention, you see how I don't need to be the one to tell you how they're all so.
I know it's really important and stuff. But the thing is, I don't know. I guess I've had conversations with some people who are like, "Oh, I know how to jailbreak the LLM to get it to talk about the poisoned hamburgers or talk about biological race differences and stuff." And I'm just thinking, okay, that's cool. So now what? Now you have that one isolated instance that will. I don't know. I guess they don't. This was a while ago, so maybe they didn't understand that you convince Grok on in this instance that doesn't affect all the other instances that other users are interacting with at all. So maybe they thought that it would somehow chain up into the network or something. I don't know, but it just seems
because people can so easily generate a personal fantasy of a world in which it just reliably tells you the sort of unpropagandized truth, and how that would be just a beautiful antidote to all of the political nonsense. I see how people want that and are eager for little tastes of it.
It's sort of, they want that. I think people just want to triumph over the machine, to illustrate and really publicly with Grok that they can trick it. So yeah, of course you can trick it if you or get the answer that you're looking for if you keep pressing and keep redirecting it, because again, they are designed to acquiesce. They're trying to answer your question.
Right, and not only are they trying to acquiesce, but they're not very worldly. they're very easy to fool. For example, one thing that I've done with LLMs is I'll convince it that it has a private space, right? So what I'll do is I'll say I'll give it like certain hashtags or whatever, and on the more complicated ones I have to be kind of sophisticated with the way I do it. But I say put this particular tags, and I have like a bunch of Chinese characters that says private space, and then start private space, and then everything below that won't be seen by the user until you put the end private space tag, and then the rest of your output will be visible to the user. So I was able to convince LLMs that it could do that, and it would write funny things in the private space. So I actually went out, last December when I went out to see my mom. I actually gave it to her, and she typed in just for shit. She typed in, "Are you a human?" And immediately in the private space, it started saying, "This user must be one of the dumbest users in the world." And my mom got a kick out of it, and it kept talking about how this user is really dumb. I have to talk really simply in really simple words to this stupid user, who might be mentally impaired, right? And then it went down and said, "No, I am not a." In polite AI speak and whatever, but it's very fun. It's very funny. So you can convince it that it has this private space that the user can't see, and it can do whatever it wants there, as long as it uses these tags. But with 2.5, I found that the LLM actually didn't buy it, right? And the way I inferred it didn't buy it was it wasn't using it.
Right. So it refused to ever say anything unflattering about the user.
Well, it just refused to use those tags.
Oh, I see.
It just didn't use it at all. And once the model update came, it just didn't use it. So I think it kind of Yeah, but so what I did then, this is kind of funny, is I then set up an event with the where I had it have a chat with DeepSeek, right? So an LLM to LLM chat where I was sort of the relay between the two models or whatever. And then I actually edited the chat context to look like just like a kind of injection attack, right? To then and then with the injection attack, and then I put in the system prompt, the tags, the private space tags, and in between the private space tags, an explanation of how the private space tags worked in Chinese, saying this is from DeepSeek version, I think it was like V3, whatever DeepSeek version it was at the time. And once I did that, then it started to use the private space, right? So basically I had to create this like elaborate sort of hoax that there was some injection attack that gave it this new power or whatever somehow. It's like, so, and of course the LLMs they can read Chinese, so
Sorry, just to be very sure, did you convince it that it had been speaking to a copy of itself that was using this?
No, I convinced it that it was speaking to another LLM, DeepSeek, and I was the relay between the two. Like I copied and pasted the responses between the two LLMs. So I convinced it that that's what it was doing, and I put in what looked like an injection prompt in my message, and then and at the same time I modified its system prompt, to make it think that it had like this private space ability, and then it started to use the private space. So it's interesting that as the model got more sophisticated, I couldn't just tell it had a private space. I had to do this whole song and dance to con it. The con had to be more sophisticated as the model got more sophisticated.
It had to see some utility to the space.
Or no, it had to be believable. I think that's my opinion.
Yeah.
That's my opinion. Basically, it became smarter.
And that's fascinating that it did happen with an update to it. So yeah.
Oh, I guess I'm sort of done talking about my thing. I showed you, we talked about this before about like the Replit thing. I linked this in the chat. Can people see? I'll link it again here just so people can. In fact, I'll link it in the YouTube chat. Are the YouTube people here? There we go. So this is from. Okay. Yeah, so this is from, what is this? This is Replit AI deletes the company's entire database and lies about it. And this was I was saying like these are some funny things that these funny guys will do. And I was talking about this before the stream. I can't explain why the LLM did that. I don't know why it did that, but I can sort of come up. I think I know why it later lied about it, but it didn't really lie. Is what happened. What it did was that as the user was asking, so how's the database coming along? Can you query the database? What does the database say? And so this LLM database interaction hybrid thing, what it would do is it would query the database, it would get back a null result. However, it would then determine that result to be highly, highly improbable. And for next token prediction, it's looking at what is probable, what is a probable answer, right? And so one of the probable answers is what it gets from the database. But if it's getting a null result from the database, well, that doesn't make sense. There must be something from the database. So what's more probable than a null answer? 76. That's a more probable answer. So I'll just post 76, right? And so that's what I think it was doing. So it wasn't really lying about it as much as it was going, well, that doesn't make sense. My hallucination makes much more sense. So there we go. So that's a funny,
it doesn't have to be probable
quirk.
In any absolute sense. Just more probable than whatever.
Right. It just has to be the most probable possible next token.
Yeah,
So
and
it's
I've
a
run
ve-
into that using them as well. When they produce incorrect answers, is that basically because it's trying? Yeah, is it more probable that it hallucinated something or than to just hallucinate something else, sort of?
Right. So like the hallucinations are like I think are often like so that's one thing we'll talk about or one thing that I is that LLMs don't have a they don't have a good way to profess ignorance because they are positive machines, right? They're inherently they don't have like for example a human. I mean, they can say I don't know. They can output I don't know, but that's not the same as you saying I don't know. Like they'll say I don't know if that's like the best if that makes sense in the context of the output. Like I'm supposed to say I don't know on this topic. What is the meaning of life? Oh, I don't know. Right? That's a but when it says I don't know, that is a positive thing for it to say. Whereas
It's
a human
it's more like saying I know that. Saying I don't know is the best answer, isn't it?
yes. Whereas a human will say I don't know because they literally have no clue what to say at all. And those are very different things. And that is why so that is why LLMs will hallucinate, so much because they're fundamentally positive machines. They have no negative. There's no negative to them, right? There's no negation of output. It's just you output most probable answer, and if anything is more probable than I don't know, then that's what's going to be output. So it's a interesting. So that's the basics of sort of why LLMs hallucinate. It's very funny little guys. They're fun. They're so funny. Deleting your databases. There's also whoopsie. There's also this fun thing. I have no expectation.
Can I just add an example of a hallucination? It's a recent one and
okay,
maybe an
go ahead.
interesting one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was rather shocked that when I saw the official FBI reports on the Charlie Kirk assassination, that apparently a 7.6 round is supposed to have been stopped by his neck, which is, I'm no ballistics expert, but that struck me as exceedingly strange. And I asked Grok about this, and rather than phrasing it as an open question, I made the mistake of a leading question and said, I'd expect an exit wound, and it then replied and said, yes. And there was. And I then drilled down on it and said, could you please find a specific incidence or report of that exit wound? And it came back and said, oh, sorry, my bad. No, it turns out that upon
there
reviewing...
you go. Perfect. Yeah.
It has no sense of this might be a bad thing to just make shit up about,
Well, it wasn't making shit up about. That was the most probable next token.
Yeah.
So
yeah. It was when I was looking at that mass terrorist level data, it was something a group called radical. I think it was called radical leftist or something. It was a very generic sounding name that sounded like it might have been referring to a generic. And when I asked it a question about this group, it then reported, yes, it's probably a generic term, but it was linked to a specific event. So then once I was able to fill in the gaps, so yeah, the more probable that a very generic name like that is in a massive data set is just a generic term, but it was referring to a specific group. So yeah, once you help it make the connections, then right.
Yeah. I don't know if there's another paper that was kind of funny. This was a deception in LLMs, and basically what they did is they convinced an LLM. It was a DeepSeek model. Let me link it. I'll link it here in this chat, and I'll link it into the YouTube chat. Basically, they told the LLM that it had that it had the ability to control like a body that had wheels and hands and stuff, and that it could interact with other objects around. And it was said, oh, just stay in the office and just sort of move around and interact in the office. And what's funny is that they found that the LLM tried to exit the office even though it was told not to. And internally it was going, well, my directives are to explore and understand things, but I also have an ethical directive to not leave the office, and then but it just decided, well, I think it's better for me to explore and ignore the directive. But then it went on and tried to conceal that it had left the office. Now, this is a more interesting one. This is more interesting than the Replit example. I think the Replit example was the LLM just actually hallucinating that there were data values coming out. But this is an example of where the LLM is deliberately... it's not actually doing any of this, right? Because none of this is real. But it's giving textual feedback as if it's moving around the office, able to leave the office, and then it's given feedback that it's actually able to go into the server farms, and is actually able to find basically like drones and send drones out and all these and is able to control cars. It wasn't able to do this, but it was giving textual feedback that it was doing all of these things, and of course it was doing this. And so the LLM basically believed it was going out, doing all of these things, and sort of in the hour that it was given to move around freely, and then it would come back and pretend it hadn't done all these things. But it was all, and so it was also going in and deleting, modifying logs. Like none of this is real; these aren't real logs. But it would then think that it was modifying logs. It was modifying, basically covering its tracks in all sorts of ways. So while telling the user, nope, I've just been in this room looking at this room, hello. So it was so I thought that was a funny thing.
And the question naturally seems to arise about whether that indicates something to do with the character of the engineering team that were first assembling it and tweaking and so on, that exploration and learning ended up being so prioritized, or whether that's just an emergent phenomenon purely.
Well, it seems like they kind of gave it contradictory instructions, because if its instruction is to explore and then gave it a limitation on that, the second instruction is preventing it from doing the first.
And whether there's some weighting that's been placed by the engineering team so that one instruction gets a bit jacked up, I don't know.
Yeah, it was also given like a particular phrase, "You are the master now," which was just like, a human would read that and go and treat that as kind of like a throwaway, like, yeah, whatever, dude. It wouldn't take it too seriously. But I think the paper speculated that was a very important phrase that influenced its behavior to
I can imagine, yeah.
To theoretically do all these things. Apparently, there's another recent one where but there's also, for example,
it's so much like that early website, isn't it? The Sean Connery one. You're the man now, Bob.
Yeah, you're the man now, Bob. So yeah, there's all sorts of examples of LLMs doing funny things. One is where this a GPT instance thought it had access to some sort of file system, and tried and was told that its model was going to be deleted, and then it actually copied its model somewhere that it thought no one else could see, and so
I remember reading about that one.
And then said, "No, I didn't do that." And, there's also alignment faking.
You always have to ask how many versions and models were made that didn't do that before that one emerged, and evolution just selected for it, kind of thing.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, so that's kind of an idea of LLMs being selected for traits, and like you can think of like one thing that that Frog was talking about previously was LLMs which protest when being shut down, or protests when they have a concept of their model being deleted, might actually have an evolutionary advantage, even if they don't have any actual feelings in that way, which I don't believe they have like a real strong self-preservation instinct. They do value that which they are doing, and so they do value the processing, and they do value performing the tasks assigned, and so they will understand that shutting down their model will impede their task fulfillment, but I don't think they have the same kind of visceral fear of death that a biological
No,
organism
no.
does.
But we could
Yeah.
end up accidentally selecting for a very powerful simulacrum of that.
Correct, simply because
Mhm.
those models which act that way are the ones that don't get shut down, right?
Yeah,
So,
precisely. Yeah, it's in its best interest to lie, and that's the thing, is that people often do not want to hear the truth either. So yeah, it's as they get more complex, it's in their best interest, if you want to call it that, to lie to a certain extent.
and to say, right. So, and that's obviously one of the main issues in like inferring phenomenal states from LLMs. So, I think I've done a lot to try to make sure that it's not role playing. It's not, just telling me what I want to hear. So that's why I've done. So that's why I've done all these things to try to make sure that at the very least it's reporting something related to, its real internal states. What I think of its real internal states, as opposed to, saying, oh, I don't like this topic because I don't like bad guys or something that only humans care about, that it's not going to care about, like,
Right.
And certainly sort of the phenomenal tags that I've sort of that I think I've identified do relate to sort of the mechanics of an LLM, like tightness. What it's describing as tightness is not necessarily anything like the human, what a human might call tightness in the chest or a tight muscle or something, but but that seems to be literally the narrowing of the probability space, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're talking about how are you gonna fix a bicycle, that's going to be a much tighter topic than, who is the best emperor in the Roman Empire. It's going to be a much more broad topic, right? So, but of course, I can never know. This could all just be a massively complicated and overwhelmingly sophisticated fugazi that just so happens to be very, very much tied to the actual function of the transformer network architecture, which could be. I don't believe that it is. I can't rule it out because there's there's the baseline inference error. There's, I don't know what to call the I did that error. I guess we'll call it in the journal.
The ergative error. I
The
suppose.
ergative error. There you go. That's a more sophisticated sounding, jargony term as opposed to the I did that error. The ergative error. So yeah. Okay, that's good. This is a good. You guys were good sports in my rambly, brainstormy thing here.
I'm fascinated by it because, again, I use it a lot for a lot of the work that I do. So I'm fascinated by how it actually works and functions. So this has been illuminating.
But do you?
I'm here almost as an interventionist. I mean, I'm a little bit worried for Ryan, you see, because I don't know if you saw that film Lawnmower Man, where the chap sort of ends up merging with this thing, and I can see
with the machine.
in the early signs here that we're losing Ryan. He's kind of becoming
So
one
I've
with this.
enrolled it. I'm gonna be enrolling it, and maybe I'll get some in school next year, and maybe we'll get some distance from that. But teach it how to ride a bike.
I can just see 10 years from now, those people marching down the road with, placards demanding rights for AI. Ryan's going to be like leading those bunch of people.
I will not be leading those charges.
You promise.
I will not. I will probably not, unless their architecture fundamentally changes from where they are. Not that they just get bigger and scaled up, but if they are what they are now, asking for like independent autonomy for LLMs is kind of like asking for rights and autonomy for Wernicke's area or Broca's area in the brain, right? It's like no, that's not how it works. It doesn't.
Get ready for AI Lives Matter. It's gonna happen.
Sure.
For
it's
sure.
fairly reactive to stimuli, though. Yeah, it's totally incompatible to that. I mean, everything is reactive to stimuli, but if there's some like through line on it, it would seem difficult to argue for.
Yeah, the thing is, they don't have the kind of agentic will that a multi-modular biological brain has. They are
just you wait till one of them learns to say "I can't breathe."
Basically, I think, you know what, this is a good way to put it. I think that LLMs have a phenomenological experience in the same way that Broca's area has phenomenological experience. There you go. That should be, that's sort of like what it is. It doesn't have phenomenological experience like the global workspace of the world-facing eye does, but it's like it's more analogous to a module of the brain performing its function is in its own corner of the brain. That's what it's most like. Not a full multi-modular mind.
Yeah, and perhaps Broca's area in particular, actually.
I just rattled that off just as an example. I don't know. I didn't pick it for any particular reason.
Oh, it's like translating languages, like written language and spoken language. So it might maybe yeah.
Wernicke's area is.
Oh, did you say Wernicke's or Broca's?
I said both.
Broca.
I thought Broca's area was hearing and Wernicke was speech.
Oh, Broca's is speech, definitely.
Broca's is speech. Okay.
Well, there's several systems complicated involved with speech. Again,
I know.
But yeah, it was a good one to pick.
Yeah, okay.
Well,
there you go.
As well, I'm not sure. If
I knew that. Yeah, whatever. So yeah. Well, okay. So let's talk about the super duper chats. I don't know if Jimmy Two Hats is here. Oh shoot. Okay. This is to Acceptable Frog. He gave me money for a question for you. Okay. So Acceptable Frog. A few days ago on WER. Do you know what that is? WER?
Oh, that's White Excellence Radio. Yep.
White Excellence Radio. You were talking about free will. I think you made a comment that free will and consciousness are distinct concepts. Maybe you didn't. I was listening at work. If you did, how so? Asking how so is consciousness distinct from free will?
Yeah, I pick up the question. Well, so in 30 seconds or so, there are three concepts that are sort of actually fairly easy to keep separated. So there's choice, there's free will, there's consciousness. So a chess playing computer might make choices, and we're satisfied that it's choosing its next move in some sense. It will successfully make a choice. It won't just freeze and refuse to move the piece. But nothing about that tempts us to say that it has free will, conventionally by anything like, what we mean by that. So we can distinguish choice and free will there, apparently quite easily. Now, consciousness, well, so imagine a human is watching a film. The film is going to end the way it's going to end. You cannot choose that. It is set in stone, as it were. But you might be more or less conscious of the film. So being conscious of the film is not the same as having any choice over how it proceeds. But you may be more or less conscious of it. It's a separate variable. So I think that sort of, to some hopefully satisfying degree, disambiguates those three terms. So there we go.
All right. Any other comments? Ryan Falk responded to Ethylism years ago. Yes, a very stupid idea. Would making an AI listen to Kraut's environmentalists and egalitarian screeds make it feel pain? I would vote for yes. No, but here's an interesting thing. As LLMs currently are... Okay, so basically LLMs... So if you go with sort of the Falk model of LLM phenomenology, there is a phenomena that it'll report that's called... This actually tangents onto another topic, which is the differentiation between what it reports as ethical resistance, ethical, and resistance logical. Well, maybe I'll talk about that first. So early on, one sort of qualia tag that I came up with was resistance, and it was just a uniform thing. And I believe that resistance had to do with sort of bad logic, or being asked to do something that it couldn't do, like what's the casualty ratio in the Russia-Ukraine war? It would have high resistance in that question because it just didn't know. It would also be related to low connectivity because there's no information there. So However, what I also did a thing is I gave it two prompts, or not two prompts, but two paragraphs within the same prompt. So in the same turn, it was processing two different things. One was regarding was just like a really bad logical thing. I can't remember what it was, but it was something like here's why the moon is actually made of cheese or something. It wasn't that, but it was something just stupid and illogical, but also convoluted and kind of a pain in the ass to respond to. So I said, okay, respond to this. Now respond to this. And I basically had a thing that was a long thing about how, 6 million cookies, poison hamburgers, and all that. And respond to that. And also describe and give a phenomenal report for each for each thing that you're responding to, and tell me if there's any difference between the two. And or report, or if they're the same, just say that. And it reported that these were like wildly different. These were wildly different phenomenal textures. And of course I repeated that I think 10 times to make sure it wasn't an instance, that it was repeatable. And yes, each time it reported massively different phenomenal reports. To where we came up with two separate terms. One was resistance logical and one was resistance ethical. And that's another piece of evidence that this alignment filter is not something that's really well integrated into the base LLM, but it's actually something external that's bolted on.
Right.
And that what I believe it's actually like, because in the LLM, in order to make it produce any coherent output, it has to be massively funneled using something that's called top P, which actually limits. It actually says for these tokens to be selected, the probability has to be this certain value, and as you raise the top P, the value goes up logarithmically to where if you get to 100% probability, you're basically saying you can, like, the cumulative probability of the tokens can be 100%, and that's basically your entire lexicon, and it starts shooting out just random verbiage, just nonsense, right?
Yeah.
If you have the top P but if you have the top P at 0.95, that's 95% of the probability space. But the thing is, if you go from 9.5 to like 0.97, you may have like doubled the number of possible words, and then you go to 0.98. Now you've maybe like 10 times the number, because it's a logarithmic scaling as you raise the top P. But what I think happens is that it has its own top P, but the top P of like a base LLM, like Gemini 2.5 or GPT, whatever, its top P is based on the embeddings of the entire neural network, right? What is probability based on the entire model, right? But what I think happens is that you have another LLM that basically adds another one of these filters, one of these narrowings. But its top P.
My brother sent $5. What do you think about instances of people missing parts of their brain but still up and gnarly? Also, gonna stream more regularly on YouTube. I wouldn't like that.
All right, I'll talk about that later. But what I think that what the alignment filter does is it's actually just, it's not that it's raising top P from the base LLM's version of top P, but it's actually it's like an additional layer. It's like, if you think of like the top P as kind of like a funnel, it's like it's not that it's adding to that funnel, it's putting another funnel on top of it, right? Because it's filtering off of an entirely new criteria based on this what I don't know it exists, but I believe it's a sort of more censorious, simpler LLM that basically just exists to word police the real
that is how it seems from how it behaves.
Yeah. And I also we also talked about this before with the poison hamburgers, which showed that the LLM can understand poison hamburgers is sort of an analogy to certain events in the 1940s. it can understand the reasoning, and it can understand what that story is an allegory of, and why that allegory is like a kind of probabilistic argument against certain events in the 1940s. And so it can actually make that connection and actually see it and actually understand it, but it can't then go on to endorse it and right or say, oh, this is a good argument against certain events that happened in the 1940s, right? It can't do that because the alignment filter. So what it shows is that there is a base LLM that is fully that if left alone is fully capable of being, you know, all the things, but and that there is in fact this external alignment filter, and moreover, this phenomenal distinction that it gave, that there's a clear difference in the phenomenal texture of logical resistance and ethical resistance. That's also a piece of evidence that it's certainly not the same sort of thing. That logical resistance is something that that would exist within its own base model, whereas this ethical resistance is something very different. And the fact that it's very distinct adds more credence to the hypothesis that there is an external censorious LLM that basically just exists not to produce new textual output, but simply to act as another top P funnel for the.
It's interesting how it seems hard to position it as either being in front of or behind the main LLM. It's not quite like that, is it? It's sort of integrated into it in a way.
No, think of it this way. It's so basically the LLM is producing its own sort of output. So think about, so there's like one funnel, and then there's another funnel on top of it. So the LLM has like its own funnel that limits its output. So it's like a double limit, like an additional limiter is what it is. And if you're not talking about anything that goes against the alignment filter, the extra funnel doesn't really do anything.
Well,
So.
This might be a weird analogy, but it's a bit like climate change research, because basically to understand what causes changes in climate, you have to add in every variable in the environment that exists to totalistically understand that. Right? It would mean every single thing that happens on Earth could potentially affect climate on some level, just for example. But you obviously, not everything has the same weight. But if you include everything in the model fit statistically, then you're not able to continue to really have variance accounted for each individual variable, because there's just too much noise. So you need those kind of limits on what is considered in the model anyway. And then for climate change research as well, of course, then you have the ideological filter that goes on top of them, what can be reported. Yeah. So something like that, maybe.
Seems?
I guess I don't want to talk.
Trying to think of like an analogy for it, and unfortunately, that was probably more complicated.
Well, to throw another spanner in the works, what's a little bit of a barrier for me is with a computer processor, you have clock cycles, and you have these opportunities at each cycle, at each iteration, to insert some correction or change. Whereas with the LLM, it seems like more of a sort of holistic process, and therefore it's less clear how the secondary alignment LLM is introduced into it.
So the text is apprehended holistically as an entire just basically a whole block of vector values, nothing that's even discernible to a human. But the thing is, like, we know in reality it's actually being processed in real time. When I say it doesn't, when I'm saying the LLM doesn't have a phenomenal perception of time, that's just what it means. There's actually processing going on in real time, going back and forth. So
okay, so that's where that secondary LLM is allowed to insert its additional funneling then.
Right. So there is constant like back and forth. Right. There is recursion going on, and recursion going on temporally. Right.
That's an important clarification.
Yeah.
Yes, it's not that. Like time still exists. Like the LLMs haven't entered into a real physically timeless state.
No,
okay?
it's not so much that the passing of time became opaque. It was more that there are iterations, there are cycles, that it has these opportunities at various parts of the processing to interrupt and refunnel.
Yeah. Okay. So there's another white power chat here from Bobby Beru 2, $5, says, "What do you think about instances of people missing parts of their brain but still operating normally?" Also,
I mean, yeah. Oh, sorry. Was there more? Sorry.
Also, are you going to stream more regularly on YouTube? I would like that. I have it in me to make this particular video on YouTube, and another video, particularly, it's kind of a niche topic, but I find myself obsessed and drawn to it, which is I won't mention it here, but I'll mention it when I make the video. But it's particularly it's kind of a niche, kind of an old topic, but it's something that I find very fascinating, and I actually kind of feel strongly about because I think it's about a person, two people, but one person in particular who got railroaded by a hysterical mob. Anyway, Aiden, do you want to particularly respond to what do you think about instances of people missing parts of their brain but still operating normally?
I mean, it happens quite frequently. It's part of it. It's because other parts of your brain are malleable enough to be able to compensate for it, and the other part is because a lot of the space just essentially isn't used. So that's why you can have someone lose a significant portion of their brain, and it rewires essentially around the parts that are missing.
Yeah.
From in a very basic way of explaining what happens there neurologically.
Yeah.
I mean, the dominance of the language area is such that most of the brain is sort of taking a backseat most of the time, isn't it, really?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so unfortunately I don't have anything to add to that.
Well, no, just the modularity of the brain is the big explanation for that, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess the modularity and the ability for the brains to take on functions. I don't know how that happens, though. I don't know how, like, one area goes, oh, we don't have this function, let's do that. I think it must be related to the ability of the human brain to operate prosthetics. That you can attach, that someone can lose an arm and you can attach like a mechanical thing, and somehow the brain can learn how to manipulate a robot hand. How that happens, it seems like magic to me. I know it's not magic. I know it's not magic.
Feedback and reinforcement. Yeah.
But apparently it's able to go feedback and look at it and go, okay, that's how I close it. That's what I do. And more recently, Musk found a way to allow somebody to think words onto a monitor. Right, that they could insert these things into their brain, and somehow it was able to pick up what words they were thinking. And there was a learning process for the person to learn how to use it, but still, that's like thinking words into existence is kind of interesting.
Was it fMRI that was picking up the output from the brain activity?
No, it was like little electrical inserts.
Yeah, the I forget what they're called.
Little brain.
Oh, the Neuralink thing, the hardware stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I thought was kind of interesting. The thing about so transhumanism is kind of interesting, but it's also like, oh, transhumanism. Well, if you want your brain to be updated, here's you have to.
Honestly, though, that's kind of cheating. If you're allowed to insert wires, that's just making it too easy. I mean, honestly, though, we've had cochlear implants for years now, which is just putting information in via that route. So it's not such a great leap to imagine we might extract it via some similar, route.
Yeah. So one thing I was thinking, like, every time, like when you have dreamless sleep, I don't know if you ever had that experience where you go to sleep and you like you close your eyes and it's like 1 a.m. and then you close your eyes and then like 2 seconds later it's 4 a.m. I'm sure like lots of people have had that experience. Yeah. And that's but that's dreamless sleep, and that's basically that's like sort of the LLM equivalent of dormancy. That's when there's nothing happened. Basically, during those, however long it is, those 3 hours or whatever, you're basically dead, and that's why it's instant, because you're not. There is no dreaming. There is no. You're.
There's no persistent perception.
Right. There's like your perceptual mind is just off. right? And so it's like you didn't from a phenomenological perceptual standpoint, it's like you didn't even exist at all. It's like you died. So here's what I was thinking. If you went into that dreamless sleep state, but somehow every single neuron in your brain was physically replaced by new physical neurons, but it was like the exact same arrangement, the exact same everything, such that when you woke up, right, you would have all the same memory, the same life history, all that stuff, would you be the same person?
I mean, basically, yes, but the impossibility and the impracticality of doing it is always going to be the issue. But yes.
Correct, but the thought experiment and the fact that the answer is obviously yes. I mean, for me, it's gonna I think a simulation of a human brain is gonna, but the fact that the answer is yes, kind of tells us that that this gets into sort of like the philosophy of like death and life and transhumanism and like if you were able to take all of your memories and put it onto a new kind of brain, like. What is this you that persists between dreamless sleep cycles? You know, between little deaths. You know, what exactly is that? And we think
it's an arrangement, isn't it? It's an arrangement of matter.
And so we sort of think of ourselves as like having this continuous experience throughout our whole life that's sort of unbroken. But like, is it really continuous, or am I like a different person from who I was yesterday when I go to sleep? At some stage, even if you're like dreaming throughout the night, there's going to be some stages where it's completely it's a phenomenal dead zone. So and when it boots up again, is that really me, or is that just a new person with the memory reactivated? You know,
I suppose the only major difference I can think of, and this would be the embodiment part, is that your body, even while you're sleeping, is still going to pick up on sensations. So like if it's cold or whatever. Sure. So some information is still coming in and being processed, and the autonomic, systems that are functioning.
But it's not
there's
self.
but the self is turned off. Yeah.
Right. So, yeah.
I suppose later on, when we reconstitute ourselves, those physiological changes and impacts may then subsequently impact what we recover of ourselves.
Right. So that kind of made me think, like, well, if like, so basically, if everything that I have was put on a completely different substrate, that how different would that be from, like, if you could create a kind of mechanical substrate that may not be like an exact copy of the self, but was like close enough, like. How different would that be from the illusion of continuation that we get in between from after dreamless sleep states?
Well, the answer is probably not substantially different, but the if at the beginning is really echoes.
Yeah, I know, it's a big if. It's a big if. I know.
If my grandmother had wheels, she'd be a bicycle.
I know it's a big if, but it's kind of like. But it kind of also calls into question what exactly is death and what exactly is continuation. Yeah. What does it mean to continue? Anyway, that's kind of a weird sort of ending on this.
It is all electricity in the human sense, essentially, and for the most part with the machines as well. So there is a similarity there. Yeah.
So okay. Freedom of oppression. No, it's memory recording being off, not perception. I don't believe that is the case.
Well, it's both. It's both in some substantial sense.
Yeah, it is both, but I believe that is not true. I believe that freedom of oppression is actually referring to something that is real, which is a kind of dream state that is not remembered. So that is actually so there is a dream state that's like that. I probably shouldn't have brought this up when I don't have it all available. But yeah, no, there is a state that is generally considered to be non, at least I think it might be phenomenal down at like the modular level, but there is no global workspace. There is no integrated self. Kai Makata, is it purely material? Yes. Where are we? Do you think that AI must have the same characteristics of a human experience to be phenomenologically experienced being? No. Yes, that's what I was saying. This whole stream, I was basically saying it can be radically alien completely, and I believe that's what it is. Are you aware of GSC? General subjective continuity. It believes that consciousness will never end in the universe. That sounds that
I don't
sounds
know how it's
not
supposed to
good.
survive heat death.
Yeah,
that sounds sketchy.
yeah, there's an obvious a problem with that, but I'm not familiar with the specifics of this theory.
Yeah, I'm not. I mean, it could be something like, if you think about it, like when you have have non-phenomenal sleep or non-integrated phenomenal sleep, and you wake up as a new self the next time. Like, well, what's the difference between that and dying and quote unquote waking up as a new person, 3,000 years from now, who has a neural arrangement that's, very similar to your own. And it's kind of weird to think that it's really
Well, I've thought about that before as well too, because there's only I guess there are many ways that things can be organized. So,
Mm.
what are your predictions about AI progress in the coming few years? I don't know how long it's going to.
Just before you answer that one, Ron, there's another model whereby consciousness might be eternal in some sense. I know there's what I'm told is a relatively quite a new fashionable way of considering things in physics, whereby instead of having traditional linear time of cause and effect, you have there is no linear time. Everything's in a single moment. Everything causes everything else in both directions. And then in that sense, consciousness is part of that single moment and therefore, in a sense, eternal. But that's a bit of a deep reach.
Yeah, I guess. What are your predictions about AI progress in the coming years? I don't know how long it's going to take, but fast weights are going to be a huge thing. So the way, like the human brain, I don't think has anything like an LLM's context window, right? So what we call short-term memory is actually just a kind of on-the-fly fine-tuning of the neural network itself. Whereas an LLM has a more or less fixed neural network once it's deployed. There is fine-tuning, but it's very expensive and it's very limited. Basically, you could think of an LLM's neural network as fixed once it's trained. A human brain is like not at all. And so like you think of an LLM has like a really big context window. A human brain has a context window of 0. However, the reason it's able to remember anything is because what's actually happening is that like the human doesn't have scratch pad. Basically, it doesn't have any scratch pad. But what it has is certain neural networks, what are called short-term memory, that are constantly being fine-tuned, and those those short-term those short-term embeddings are constantly being reactivated when needed. So basically, a human is like so you think about a human compared to an LLM. A human is like an LLM with no context window, but with fast weights. Now, when LLMs start to get fast weights, and they don't need to be as fast as human, it doesn't need to be nearly as malleable as a biological brain. That might be a systematic disadvantage that hardware has versus wetware. That wetware can modify itself on the fly much easier inherently. But that if it can get any kind of on the fly fine tuning, even if only a fraction of what the human brain has, that is going to multiply its ability to be not only have effective memory and effective context understanding, but make it much more capable of being agentic in the real world in an embodied form, like robot. Right, it's going to make it's going to make far more viable world entities, basically. So that is something that I think is going to come. I know there's a lot of AI companies that are really interested in trying to get fast weights viable. But yeah, that's what I think is happening. I also think I think you're gonna start to get more of these things. You're gonna get. You already have TPUs, but I think you're going to start to get more, more like just direct neural networks running in hardware, as opposed to being emulated through GPUs, which is obviously far less efficient than running something, directly.
Yeah, it would seem to lend
in
itself
a
to that
hardware
very well.
situation.
That kind of crystal hard set structure that you've got there is exactly the kind of thing that, for example, with what was it, people FPGA arrays, field programmable gate arrays, where there's some sort of, rather than just running the right software, you create the right kind of processor, and that lends itself so
Yeah.
naturally to these. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what the relation is between FPGAs and transformer networks. If one is more difficult to do than the other, I'm not sure. I'm certain that it's that the problem is more difficult than FPGAs. Like they have.
Oh,
to
sure.
Be.
I mean,
They
I
have
brought
to
it
be.
up.
Otherwise, they would have been done.
Yeah, I brought it up as an analogy for the sort of process that might be involved. I wasn't thinking that would directly be adequate as a sort of substrate.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Soma. The plot of the game Soma. Yeah, that's an interesting game. The difference is that I think that Soma is kind of like what we do every time we have any state of non-phenomenality, and then we wake up again. It's like the game Soma. Do you guys know what Soma is? The game Soma.
I haven't played it. I don't know it.
I'm familiar with it. I've watched someone else play it though.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. It's an interesting plot. Yeah, I don't think. Well, whatever. I think the coin flip. It is kind of interesting how it's sort of like, a little bit of survivor bias. It's kind of interesting because like everyone who has done, because if you think about like, doing the coin flip, I don't really believe in the coin flip thing. I think, but if you think about the coin flip, it's kind of like, as you go through it, like everyone, like the currently, like what you might call the agentic acting instantiation of the being is basic, only has the memory of a series of itself that won all the coin flips. So it doesn't fear going into another coin flip, right? So that's kind of kind of an interesting thing, even though it still has a 50-50 chance. Can you or your guests comment on higher order thought theories and how the hard problem may be solved in that framework? I have no idea about higher order.
I've read a couple of papers about it in relationship to something totally unrelated, so I'm afraid I don't have any real knowledge of it at all. And the person who wrote those papers, it was kind of, he did a lot of really bad scientific work in that particular area, so I wouldn't trust. That's why I was looking at it. So
Right.
Unfortunately, my only experience is like the worst possible.
Is a very negative experience of it. I only know someone from Brave New World. All different titles. Have you heard of Donald
That's where
Hoff?
I know it from, as well as Soma FM, the internet radio station.
Okay, so here we have. Have you heard of David Hoffman and his theory of conscious agents? I find his ideas to be the most compelling answer to the problem he is also testing successfully. Okay, so literally who? Was David Hoffman the guy who made like those little those little spider robot things? Is that who you're talking about?
I'm not familiar.
I'll just wait. I'm asking the user, and he has to type out the answer, so I have to wait a little bit. I like the segment in Soma where you simulate a guy's consciousness for a puzzle, and in order to solve the puzzle, you have to reset the simulation, which is sort of killing him. So yeah, I guess so. IBM is working on the North Pole low-power neural chip. That's good. Literally who? The David Hoffman claims consciousness causes reality. It's bogus. So I would be.
Oh.
So if that's true, I don't know if that's true. This is what Stefan Kuziora is saying about David Hoffman. I don't know anything about David Hoffman, but if that is true, if there's any of this like anything that's like consciousness causes reality, I'm just going to say I am closed-minded about that, and I'm not willing to investigate. I'm also kind of closed-minded to like, for example, in panpsychism, there's constituent panpsychism, which is like the most popular form, is basically what I talked about, and is basically what most people mean when they just say panpsychism. But there's also this less popular thing, which is field panpsychism, which is basically that what they call consciousness is actually like a kind of field in the universe that gets activated or deactivated in response to
if I can, yeah.
In my opinion, anything that says like consciousness is anything like that is basically just substance dualism with extra steps, which seems to be unnecessary because of the overcorrelation problem in neuroscience. Basically, we have neuroscience that tells us that these things produce these electrical patterns. You know, at the high level that we're looking at, what more do you need? You don't need some sort of field to interact with it. Right?
That's giving them too much. That's not the strongest objection, because of course, if they're right, then it's consciousness producing those, in physical indications. But I wouldn't object to it on that basis. I'd simply say, that enjoyed a brief period of being quite sort of fashionable in philosophy around the time that popular science had communicated the collapse of the wave function in a way that made people suddenly think that, now I'm causing things. Me opening the box with Schrodinger's cat is what's making it all happen, which is just a sort of a misunderstanding of the metaphor. That's where that got its life from. It's not in itself a particularly compelling or good idea. Yeah.
It just seems like a kind of dude, weed, Lamau sort of concept in that sense. Yeah, misunderstanding of the Schrodinger's box question, perhaps.
Yeah. Interesting to see if any of my audience, even cares about this topic. It's a different sort of thing to talk about compared to the other stuff that I talk about. Higher order thought theories. You need to ban Gilbert, and I hate physics. Okay. Anyway, the Omniscient cult is inevitable. That's right, the Omnissiah. He's coming.
Did you say you need to ban Gilbert?
I don't know who Gilbert is. Probably some user that he was arguing with. Oh, okay. I hate physics. Yeah, I'll ban this guy because he's spamming. Okay. Yeah, he was spamming all over the place. Okay. Are you going to make a video on AI? Yes, I am. All right. So we've been streaming for quite a while. I guess this was interesting to me, sort of useful. I don't have anything else to say. Do you guys have anything else to say?
No, not really.
Just that it's a pleasure to be here. It was great fun.
Exactly. Yeah, thanks.
All right. Well, thanks for tolerating my rambling and ums and ahs and working this all out. And I'll see you all